family drama in a yellow Volkswagen bus, a devilishly fashionable Meryl Streep, a dystopian world where women can't get pregnant, learning about Kazakhstan under questionable circumstances, that brief moment where someone cast Dane Cook as a leading man, 300 Spartans showing off their six-packs, 007 being revived for a new generation, Leo DiCaprio desperately trying to nail accents, scandalous notes, dark fairy tale worlds, electrolytes, snakes on a motherfucking plane, uncovering a magician's secret, pursuing happiness, winning Oscars for playing royalty, Martin Scorsese finally being recognized after a legendary career, and was The Departed deserving of Best Picture? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe go fuck yourself. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew to talk to you about the year 2006. Okay, I'm your host, Andrew. Welcome back to the Revisionist Almanac, the show that gets into the time machine, takes a deep dive into past Academy Award ceremonies, and determines what the voters that year got right, and more importantly, what they got wrong. This is the 5th episode of the season, and I'm joined by a returning guest and someone who is brave enough to take his first dive into the dangerous waters of Revisionist Almanac prep. Up first, we've got another guest of the show coming from across the pond. While he might be making his podcast debut right now, those that follow him on social media know everything about DanLovesFilm. He has insightful movie opinions, and I'm delighted to be here talking with him. Please welcome Daniel Edwards. Daniel, thanks so much for being here on this episode.
Thanks for having me. Like you said, this is my first venture into podcasting. I've been wanting to get into it for some time now since, I've been sort of having my own personal opinions on films for, years now, since growing up. Past 2 years since I started DanLovesFilm in 2023. Just do written reviews on my website and then obviously post sort of snippet versions on Instagram with like links and stuff to the full reviews. But I think the next step, this is a good sort of gateway, like being a guest on here, looking to start, my own podcast film reviews on the podcast. So it's good to be a guest. So I don't have that pressure of having to organise things, but it gets me used to, just being on the podcast and getting used to being in front of the camera, I suppose.
It feels like the next evolution of your page, because I've been following you for the last couple of years, and it feels like you're ready to take that next venture.
Yeah, I think so. Because I've plenty to say, when the random reviews, which like, there'll be like 1,500 words or something. It's like 5-6 minute read. I could go on a lot, and I just don't want people to, to tread through a lot of wording. So I try and keep it as brief as I can, but try and get everything I want across. So I think podcasting, it's a lot faster, it's more engaging, I think, for more modern audiences rather than written reviews, which is still a great thing to have, but I think, with modern audiences, I think it's more trendy and more engaging to have an actual podcast to express my reviews on. So I think that is the way I want to go.
Well, that is the perfect segue over to my second guest, because she is both a podcaster and a writer herself, back for the 3rd time, which makes her the first female to achieve that milestone, and also puts her second behind Thomas Duncan from the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast with most appearances. She's an award-winning author with a new book ready to share with the world. We'll talk more about that later. Help me in welcoming back my friend and yours, V.P. Morris. V, thanks so much for coming yet again.
Of course, I'm excited to be here, but I do have a very important question, and it's, are you a co-op?
I'm not doing my Boston accent. I'm not trying.
We have to start it off because it's the only important question when it comes to this year.
You definitely have the closest proximity of the three of us to Boston, so I was hoping that you would have the best Boston accent. Mine is pretty terrible. I occasionally will pock the caw, but yeah, my Boston isn't very strong. Daniel, I don't know if you've been practicing the accent.
I can't even do accents from my own country, let alone ones from the States. So the best I do is, an obvious word to say is like co-op.
Yeah, co-op.
Are you a co-op? I don't know. I'm not good at accents, let alone American ones. It's not a strong suit for me. Everything just tends to sound Welsh, right?
Yeah, we'll probably keep the accents to a minimum, but there might be a spot or two where we break them out. But again, thank you both for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. V, you've bounced all over the place with decades. We've done the 1950s, we've done the 20s, now we're in the 2000s. Who knows where you're going to find yourself next time you come back, if you dare to come back for a fourth time on a future season. But definitely looking forward to talking to you both about this year. As a reminder, this show again looks back on past Academy Awards ceremonies with the luxury of hindsight to determine what should have won the Oscar for Best Picture, Best Director, and the 4 acting categories. Before we start things off, though, I hope you'll take time to rate and review the channel on whatever podcast streaming platform you're currently listening on, as well as finding and following the show on every social media platform using the handle RevAlmanac. All right, so 2006. For those that are not familiar with this year, the Best Picture winner, of course, was Martin Scorsese's The Departed. Before we get into the categories, I want to take a moment and look at the year as a whole. So I've got a couple of questions for you both, and then we'll dive into the full categories. First question, how did you find the prep project overall? V, I'm going to go to you first because you've had now 3 separate experiences doing podcast prep for this show. How did you find 2006 compared to 1954 and 2015?
I actually think this year is my easiest one. The 1950s had less total movies, but they're harder to find and harder to even get, because sometimes I like to listen to some other people's commentary on movies just to like get other opinions. And there was, there's just less commentary on very, very old films. And then 2015, there was just so many of them. And there's a lot here too, but there were so many of them, and it was very difficult to choose from a lot of them. I still felt a little bit of that this time, but I had an easier time picking my winners and my nominees and just being able to sort of weed things out. So I think, yeah, this has been, because it's still modern enough that we're not getting lost in a time we don't remember, but it was, not overwhelming, where 2015 felt like there was just so many choices, and this one was a bit easier at least.
Yeah, I would really quickly share those sentiments that having done so many of these preps month after month, it feels like the early eras are challenging to find sourcing for the films in a lot of cases. And then once you get into like 2010 and all the way up until the present, there's legitimately like 50 or 60 movies that I feel like I need to get my hands on. Whereas this is kind of the sweet spot for me, where almost all of these movies I had seen multiple times before and there was a lot of recognition to them. So I could kind of go into prep a little bit easier. And I didn't feel like I needed to watch the total amount that we do nowadays, because like it feels like there are just more films in totality now versus even 20 years ago. Daniel, this is your first experience doing this. How did you find the prep process as a whole?
I think it was a good year for me to start with. Like we said, if my first year was something like in the 50s, or whether it's fewer films, but I'm probably less likely to have seen most of them fewer films, barring some of the Best Picture winners or some of the big hitters, sourcing them films. Whereas I think with 2006, like similar to yourself, Andrew, I'd seen good chunk of the films that we'll probably discuss in. Some of them I'd not seen for as recently as some of the others, and some I've watched countless times. They know them very, very well. But what I did find interesting was, because in 2006, some of these films I haven't watched for 18, 19 years. And, I was 13 when they were coming out. So there was films that didn't, sit as strongly with me then, because I was 13. I mean, stuff like Borat, for example, when I was 13 was great. Absolutely loved it. That's the sort of something like Talladega Nights or something. Those sort of things. Like there'd be the odd, more award-friendly film like The Departed and stuff when I was that age. But films like Little Children, or Notes on a Scandal, for example, I probably watched when I was about 14, 15, bit too young to fully appreciate like the melodrama on both, and similar to like the goal there as well. It's films like them three are the ones that when I rewatched them, I've not seen them for years, I was like, yeah, this is a lot different to what I remember, because I think we're just too young at the time, where stuff like more accessible films, like more thrillers like Blood Diamond, I think at 13 you get what you need to get out of it. There might be some things that might go over your head, but I think thematically, so it's a more mature thematic films that I've got a better understanding with, I think. revisiting some of them.
Yeah, this is a fascinating year because when in 2006 I would have been 20, and the way I was consuming film at 20 is significantly different than the way I consume film at 40. And I feel like I went through like my own like film bro phase in my 20s, as I feel like a lot of us, certainly of the male of our species, do. And so like there were definitely movies at 20 in 2006 I was very fond of that I don't think I'm as fond of now from this particular year. So it's been an interesting evolution for myself to see how my film tastes have changed. And this year is a really interesting microcosm of that. Now, Daniel, another question I always ask people this season is, do you have any advice for somebody who's coming on the show later this year, in the future? Is there anything that you took away from your prep process that you would impart on the next person? Maybe something that you found was really helpful in watching all these movies, or maybe something where you're like, wow, I maybe shouldn't have done that in hindsight. Do you have any advice for somebody coming on down the road?
I think you don't want to over exert yourself. I don't think you get to a position like, I'm going on the podcast. I'm going to spend a whole day. I'm going to fly through 12 films, because by the time you get to your 3 or 4 films in especially if it's something that requires a lot of attention, you're not going to benefit, especially if it's something you've not seen before, if it's not a revisit. I think also taking notes. I think it's important for like just knowing names of like, if you're unfamiliar with the director or the cinematographer, or it's something I appreciate, so you can reference them. Well, I think other than that, in terms of making notes of like your foot, I think you just sort of just enjoy watching the film, I think, and then sort of when it comes to the podcast, you'll know how you felt about it because it's fairly recent in your memory. That so it becomes more natural rather than reverting back to notes. But that could just be me. It's the same with like anything like speeches or interviews. It's like some people can have notes in that. I suppose it's personal preference, but I think for me, I think it's more than natural. I mean, I've got some notes, but nothing too much to revert back to. I think whatever suits you best and approaches, so like how you'd want to pass on information, what suits you best, I think, without putting too much straight out.
Now, we've booked this episode a long way out, like we talked about right before we started recording. I think it was a year plus that we had sort of decided on this year. So like, did you start prepping way back when, or did you kind of like wait until we got closer to this date to start watching stuff? How did your process watch for prepping for things over this course of the year?
I think it was just natural. I think I'd have a tendency to once I knew we were doing this, a year and a year and a half ago, I think we decided, scheduled in. So yeah, I think I recall off the back of it, like, oh, that probably, unless I get on with my own podcast, it's going to be my first podcast, and it has turned out to be, even though it's been a year and a half. I remember thinking immediately after it, I think I did watch something. I think I was just sat at home, like flicking through Netflix or Prime Video or something to watch, and I think I did watch something, some channel thing. It's a nice watch, love watching it. And then I think it's just natural when stuff watching. I remember thinking it wasn't so much like planning, like, oh, I'll watch this. And then thinking, oh, this is good prep, actually, because, it came out in 2006. It's more like landed that way. And as we got closer, it became more like, right, I'm not too familiar with this. I've not seen this for a long time. So I've got an evening, nothing really planned. I'll sit down and I'll take time to watch film as we've got closer. But when I first planned in the year and a half ago, I think it just one of the things where I didn't even really think about it, to be honest. But it's come around surprisingly quick. But I feel like we've got through a good amount in that time. I think rather than it being announced and scheduled and you being like, oh, you're up next week, I'll be like, oh, shit, I need to get some like research done. So I think it worked out quite well in the end. I only want time to get through it.
It is funny though, because like you said, I feel like I always schedule these really far out, and my guests always are like, wow, that kind of snuck up on me quicker than I was anticipating, because you just kind of put it in the rear view for a while, and then all of a sudden you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, we're 10 weeks out from recording or whatever the case may be. And sometimes there's always a little bit of a cram process to it, but I've it feels like people have started to space things out a little bit further, which is nice. Now, V, I know on the past episode, you've done a very good job on your 2 prep processes of you kind of know what you don't want to waste your time with. Like, you're very intentional with your decision making. Did you find that in 2006 as well? Were you very careful about like, okay, I know I don't need to waste my time with this, or how did you find this prep experience?
Yeah, so I kind of started it around Christmas time because there's just more time of like sitting at home, it's cold. So I kind of just did like 2 or 3 movies like a week and like getting closer into like the March period to finish things up. So it was more like slow and steady because also if I binge too much too fast then I kind of get burnt out. Yeah, there were just some stuff that I remember seeing from this time that I wasn't really interested in revisiting, and like I saw The Pursuit of Happiness when it came out. I didn't rewatch it because even though been almost 20 years, I remember a lot of it. And while it was good, I just knew it wasn't going to be like a winner for me. So that one was taken out. And a funny thing that Andrew and I we've discussed is that I didn't watch Casino Royale because Daniel Craig looks freakishly like my father, and I just can't watch, especially when like he's shirtless or there's women all over him. I just can't do it because I'm just like, it's my dad, even though he's definitely not as in shape, no offense, dad, as Daniel Craig and is, and it's obviously not a perfect representation, but he's the celebrity that looks the most like my father. So I'm just like, I can't watch anything where he's like supposed to be the love interest or he's like half naked just because I'm just like everyone else is like ooh, and I'm like nope. No, not happening. So that one was not watched and will not be appearing on my list for those reasons.
I think there was a period after Casino Royale where a good majority of men between probably about 35 and 50 probably looked at themselves in the mirror and thought, you know what, I could be Daniel Craig coming out with that. I've also just shifted that since then because you've had me saying Daniel Craig instead of Daniel Craig. So, yeah, boy, I see themselves like going, I could come out of the sea, in tight blue swimming shorts and see myself as the next James Bond. I think a lot of people thought themselves that way somehow back in 2000.
Well, let's kind of talk about your takeaways from the year as a whole. So before we get into the categories and kind of get into the minutia of all the different performances, V, is there anything that you took away from the totality of your 2006 watches? Any themes that stood out, or any just like general things that you want to get out from your overall prep experience on the year?
Yeah, so there's actually a big theme of war through all of them. I don't know if you picked that up, either of you. It's not, necessarily always the main theme. It's not all of them are war movies TM, but there is war in the background of lots of them, whether that's something fictional, like, I mean, I guess depends on how fictional-esque, like 300, because it happened, but it didn't happen the way that this movie portrays it. But there's, it's a historical slash fantasy war. There's, wars from the past that are being played out. There's a lot of, or at least some, like Middle East drama that may not be full on war, but since it was 2006, you kind of couldn't parse the two out. And then there was, some kind of, what if type wars like Children of Men, going on of like, and also like to a lesser extent, a little bit the Korean film, The Host. I don't know if either of you got to that one. Even though it's not a full-on war, there's kind of like a future dystopian, like the whole country gets locked down vibes. And I went through the years before and after this, so like 04 and 03, 05, and like a few years after, and none of them have this level. It's about 11 on this list that you provided, Andrew, and I went through the best like movies of those few years, and it's like 3, 4, 5. So I feel like we're actually like at peak processing 9/11 slash War on Terror at this time, because it takes like 3 years for a movie to be made. So all of those feelings of that time are finally starting to come out in these movies. And, there's some really great ones, but at a certain point I was kind of like, I don't want to watch another war themed movie. But I definitely noticed that. There's a little bit of like Catholicism slash Catholic guilt with The Departed, and there's themes of that in Pan's Labyrinth, if you know to look for. So just like a hint of that too, because also this is only 5 years after the Spotlight scandal dropped the whole child molestation thing, so it kind of makes sense that maybe there's two movies that are processing like what, a different way of viewing.
Yeah, you could definitely tell this was like the height of the curve for post 9/11 filmmaking. Obviously, United 93 was sort of like the very obvious shiny point for that particular, post 9/11 movement. Daniel, anything that you picked out of the year that you found thematically, or just like something that you noticed from this year after really like looking at it closely?
Yeah, I think V touched on one of the things that I was going to talk about, which is about war and conflict, whether they be real or almost fictitious, like in Children of Men, for example. But then, you get some that resulting or led to war, like United 93, and then you've got either like war or conflict in Africa with like Blood Diamond and The Last King of Scotland and stuff. Or the other thing which is sort of related is just terrorism and sort of that fear of in people's perception of people from different countries that came off the back of 9/11 in that sense of terrorism. So obviously 1993 is the obvious one, obviously about the 9/11 attacks. But then you've got like Children of Men, also it's to do with like these revolutionists sort of seeing the terrorism, piece of vendetta. You've got this domestic terrorism, which is like a revolutionary propaganda. And then you've got, this idea of, how people start their perception of people from different countries shifted after 9/11. Even though it's a comedy, he's not, he's obviously from here, but like Borat, in like how people to some extent of like, this crazy Kazakh journalist going around America with these real people and how they are so cold and apprehensive with him. I know that's obviously the joke, but how he acts as well. And then one film that I'll probably talk about later, this side of things, which is obviously set before and not to do with obviously the post 9/11 sort of attitude towards people, different cultures and stuff. It's This Is England. It's to do with just English, far extreme racial propaganda and views, which they've been going for 50, since the 70s, really, longer than that, but the sort of what it touches on since the 70s and 80s when the film's set. Like we said, that also has this background of the Falklands War playing out, which you never see, but it's mentioned as like one of the main characters, his father, died in the Falklands War, and that shifts his views from being a innocent child to starting to pick up radical views of people from different cultures because of conflict and how it's affected it. So I think conflict and terrorism in this 5 years from 9/11 is a big thing that plays a part in a lot of these, even if it is historical or hypothetical conflicts. It's in everyone's minds at the time, and I think that led to these films getting produced. Essentially, a lot of them certain sorts of things.
Yeah, I assumed you both would pick up on the same kind of themes that I was on, which was war, conflict, post 9/11 movement in filmmaking. I kind of tried to shift away some of my perspective on it, and I just thought that this year felt really top heavy in terms of the quality of the films. There are a few films I would deem as like complete masterpieces of this year, and then a lot of good stuff, and then like a whole tier below that of fine. I don't know. There was, having just come off of doing 1999 last month, that year felt a little stronger top to bottom. This one felt a little more segmented in terms of very few top tier movies, a decent chunk of good movies, and then a little bit lower. And then I also just like, we'll get into this very heavily during the categories, but it felt like a very strange year of nominations and some interesting makeup choices and legacy choices. And I have a feeling the three of us aren't going to completely align with what actually was nominated and won, but we'll find out for sure shortly. But that was my big takeaway, was you could tell the demographic of the voters in the Academy at this particular time and how far off they are from, I think, what movies have aged really well from 2006 versus what was in the conversation for the awards discussion at that year. Let's talk about some bad movies, though. So, Daniel, do you want to single out any movies that you just did not enjoy going to in this prep process? Is there anything that you just did not have fun with?
Yes, I have one, and I have always thought this about this film. And I remember when I was 13, when I watched it, it was the talk of the town. I remember all my friends loved it. Obviously, we were underage to watch it, but it was 15. It's like one of the first 15s I watched in a cinema, like, even though I was 13, I think I snuck in. And all my friends are like, oh, it's great, it's so good. And the action, it's really good. I love it. I love the visuals. And then I remember being so hard to see it. Went to see it, and to this day, the only film I've ever left the cinema. And I've never walked out. I've seen worse films than this, I would say. But because of the age, I was like, oh, this is rubbish, I'm walking out. Whereas now, if I'm not enjoying something, I will still stick to it. And it's one of my gripes when I'm in a film and you see people walk out. Like, I remember watching Very Afraid the other year, and it's 3 hours long, and people walking out for 2 hours 40. And I'm like, you've come in now for 2 hours 40. You've got 20 minutes left. Stay for it. But yeah, the film that was not just a disappointment, but I really, really hated it as a result. And I've barely watched it since, and that is 300.
Okay. Shot fired at 300.
I was so disappointed. I think it was all the hype my friends had around it. I remember really wanting to see it, and I remember watching it. This is it came out, and just remember thinking, God.
Do you have general feelings of, do you not care for Zack Snyder's filmmaking in general, or is this an outlier for you
But
on his list?
I think Zack Snyder. I didn't think he'd get touched on, to be honest. But Zack Snyder, he's one of them where people love him or hate him. He's a Marmite director, as we say here in the UK, where the people who love him are proper fanboy over him. They're obsessed, which led to the release of like the Snyder Justice League coin stuff, which I also didn't think I'd mention on this podcast. We'll do that. I remember I really liked Dawn of the Dead remake. I did enjoy that, and to this day, that is the only film of his that I do like. I don't like anything else he's done. Now, I don't know if that's my unpleasant experience with 300. He just always had me shift that way. So all the thing. But he's just one of them filmmakers where he just always gets in the way and stuff. I remember I wanted to see something. I can't remember what year it was now. I mean, Toy Story. Toy Story 3, Toy Story 3 or one of Paranormal Activities when they were big. The first couple. And I remember wanting to see it with my friends, and there was no showings at that time, even though it was a massive film we went to see. But the film they were showing at instead was that bloody Zack Snyder owl thing, that Legends of Kakul or whatever it's called. I was like, what is this, Zack Snyder? Get out to my cinema. I was like, what is this? He's just one of the filmmakers who's just like, I always think he's like an enemy. An enemy.
You're right, though. Like, he's a very polarizing director. I was just on Instagram with another podcast and saw them like doing their top 10 favorite directors of all time, and he came up on the favorites list. And there's either like the army of Zack Snyder fans or the people like you who are very much not into it. I'm more sided with you. I find that his use of slow motion is obsessive and gratuitous, and it's like, what are you doing? You're just wasting time. So I'm more aligned with you on the Snyder opinions for sure.
Them two Rebel Moon films could have been over in 10 minutes if he didn't have slow motion.
Yes, exactly.
Could have been a short film.
V, what about you? Anything that you really want to lambast for not having a good time with on this?
Yes, and it's going to make me wildly unpopular with the film bros, more so than these.
More than Seven Samurai?
Well, more than no. I mean, thankfully, no one really actually. It was Yargos. So like when I was on 2015, a lot of people I don't like Yargos, and people were like, how? And this becomes even more awkward because he just died. I cannot stand David Lynch's work. I tried to make it through Inland Empire. I did it twice. I did 15 minutes, and I cannot. This is my Meatloaf moment that I will do anything for podcasts, but I won't do that. And I just cannot. I cannot do. It's not because, to be clear, it's not because I don't respect him as an artist. He very clearly has a vision and can execute that vision, but it is just not for me. Like, I don't have Picassos in my house because I kind of like more like poster art, but that doesn't mean Picasso didn't do good stuff for art. David Lynch has done good stuff for filmmaking / horror as a genre, but it's just not for me. I don't know what it is, but there's like it's like when dogs hear those high pitched noises other people can't hear. Like when I'm just like, oh God, I can't. Like I'm just so uncomfortable. It just like does something to my brain. I've made it through Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, and all of like the original Twin Peaks. So like there are aspects that I like, but it is just not for me. He's the opposite of like, for my own writing, I like to be very efficient and I like to not make the audience work really hard. And he does the opposite. He wants it to be long. He's going to waste some time and he wants you to work really hard to understand what is going on. And I'm just not about that life. So sorry, David Lynch fans. I understand it if it's your jam, because like I'm a big, we'll get to it, Del Toro fan. And as I learned from last time, not everyone, including our friend Adam, is a Del Toro fan. So I get it having a dude that's like your dude, and then other people don't like it. But yeah, I just cannot.
David Lynch, even though David Lynch personally, he's my favourite filmmaker, David Lynch. But at the same time, I'm not surprised. Seven Samurai, I'm more surprised about the Seven Samurai. The Yorgos one, I'm also not surprised because, but David Lynch, even though, I love his work, not even just in film, like Twin Peaks, in some of his art and music is fantastic. Like one of the best things I've seen on TV in the past 20 years is that 8th episode of the Twin Peaks Return, starting with that slow pan into the nuclear explosion scene, and it was all in black and white. Amazing imagery that episode. But I appreciate that David Lynch is not for everyone. He is an acquired taste, a bit like Zack Snyder. I'm not comparing the two, but David Lynch, as much as I love him, I've tried it with friends and stuff. It's like, oh, you've got to watch Mulholland Drive, or you've got to watch Eraserhead, or we've got to or it was like the case of this year in Empire, which is his last film. He's not for everyone. He's a very niche filmmaker, and you have to have a certain mindset going into one of his films. And if you don't have it, you are not going to have a good time.
I didn't think we were going to have Zack Snyder and David Lynch in the same sentence on this episode, so that's just funny how those two gentlemen were side by side on this conversation.
That is the best. That is the best plaudit Zack Snyder can ever have in his career. That he's been mentioned in the same sentence as David Lynch, and I've given him that. No shame.
Yeah, I had a feeling, knowing V's feelings on Lynch, I had a feeling that movie was not really going to vibe with you. And of all of the movies, Inland Empire might be his most abstract, or it's definitely one of his harder to break through films, I think, for casual audiences. So I'm not surprised that one didn't land with you. I'll call out, there were 3 movies for me that I'll call out really quickly that I did not have a good time with watching any of them. First one is Venus. I think the only reason that movie I had to watch that movie for prep of this was because they wanted to get Peter O'Toole another nomination and hope that he could get an Oscar. And I don't know. I do not like Venus at all. The Illusionist is basically The Prestige, but it's boring to me. Maybe Daniel disagrees a little bit with The Illusionist. V, do you disagree with me?
Yes.
I feel
Go on. You go first because I've seen your letterbox, Andrew, and I have to give you a hard time about something.
I think The Illusionist was unfortunate that it came out the same year as a Prestige, because it's one of them famous things that happens now and then when you get 2 films on a very similar subject in a setting. Like you have A Book of Life and Ants, and you have like Armageddon and Deep Impact. These sort of things that always seem to come out together. And then I think The Prestige, being Nolan, even though it's early-ish Nolan, it is a film which we talked about before. I do like The Prestige. I am a fan of The Prestige. I do prefer it to The Illusionist, But I do think The Illusionist is I do enjoy The Illusionist. It was just very unfortunate. It was massively overshadowed by the allure of The Prestige, which is a showier, more twisty, more, film where The Illusionist is a lot more grounded, has plenty of intrigue in itself. And, I think Edward Norton's great in The Illusionist. I think his performance is better than any of the performances in The Prestige. I think it's a good sense of performance, and I think it's worth seeing. I think it's just unfortunate. I think it's just talent and so.
I do want to hear your critique of my letterbox here in a second. I'll throw out the other movie really quickly.
Go ahead.
I did not vibe with The Queen, and apologies to Daniel and your homeland and your country, but I don't need any more movies about British royalty for the rest of my life. Just I could do without The Queen. I think The Crown is a far superior look at British royalty and the history of that than some of the movies that have been made about it. So that's kind of where I stand on that movie. But V, what would you like to say about my letterbox? I'm very curious.
So first of all, I'm one of the rare people who likes The Illusionist better than The Prestige. It might be because I saw The Illusionist when it came out, but I didn't see The Prestige. So maybe it's just like, because I was 14 and the things you see when you're that age, you kind of like keep, even though I honestly don't think either of them are like good with a capital G. They're just like all right, but I think The Prestige is kind of goofy because it's like it's basically It Was My Twin, but like on steroids. So I'm just like, oh, okay, twist, all right. But in what world does The Prestige have a 0.5 higher than Letters from Iwo Jima, Andrew? In what world, in what universe does Japanese soldiers dying on an island be less good than a bunch of clones?
Be careful how you answer this now, Andrew.
So I really like Letters from Iwo Jima. It's significantly better than Flags of Our Fathers. But I think maybe that's my problem with Iwo Jima is that I group those two movies together since Eastwood made them together, and like I sort of treat them as kind of one. But yeah, I really enjoy The Prestige. I'll be talking about The Prestige a little bit more in this, but yeah, I'm a fan of that movie. I think it's better than a lot of Nolan's other movies, which I think Nolan has gotten a little too gimmicky and playing with time, and it's sort of become redundant at this point. And I actually think it felt a little more novel to me in 2006 with The Prestige and the way he was kind of playing with things. And I think it's a more interesting movie than some of his other films. But I respect the disagreement on The Prestige and The Illusionist for sure. All right, well,
you mentioned The Queen. The Queen is one of the films, I know obviously it's to do with our monarchy and, R.I.P. Liz. But it is, like you say, just another film about monarchy. It's a well-made one. It's one of the better ones, I would say. I think it's better than The King's Speech, I'd say. But at the same time, it doesn't offer a lot. I think The Crown is a better representation of what she achieved. But The Queen is one of them prime examples of where no matter whose house you go into in the UK, it could be your grandparents' house, families of friends, they would all have The Queen on DVD. It probably never been watched. It's probably still in its plastic seal, but everyone had it on DVD for some reason. They probably never watched it. It just sat there on the shelf. The Queen, and you can't miss it because it's a bright white box with the sort of silver lettering or whatever it is. And obviously just the pale image of Helen Mirren's face on the side of the box. You just can't miss it. And it's just there in everyone's house, including my own. And I never watched it on DVD, but we have it.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, it won the BAFTA that year for Best British Film, which makes a lot of sense, obviously.
Yeah, they have a tendency to do that. Not so much these days. Now and then, but they used to have a bad tendency to do like the full one, the funerals.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the last 3 or 4 years, I have tended to agree more with the BAFTAs than the Oscars. I think the BAFTAs have gotten in a really nice groove for what they've nominated and what they've given wins to. All Quiet on the Western Front stands out to me recently over Everything Everywhere All at Once. I prefer that film, yeah. All right, well, let's get into the categories in a minute, but it's worth mentioning if Daniel V and I agree with any of the actual Oscar wins in any of the categories we're going to dive into, that selection will skip the online voting process and it goes straight into the Almanac. We're going to list off what was nominated and what won in every category. We're going to wipe the slate clean and we're going to make our own nominations and our own winner picks. I've also got a few notes on the Academy Awards ceremony worth mentioning really quickly. Dreamgirls received the most nominations that year with 8, the first and only time the film with the most nominations in a year was not Best Picture nominated. And an honorary award was given to Ennio Morricone in recognition of his magnificent and multifaceted contributions to the art of film music. All right, well, let's get into the categories. You both ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start off with the Best Supporting Actress category. The actual nominees in 2006 were Adriana Barraza for Babel, Rinko Kikuchi, also for Babel, Abigail Breslin for Little Miss Sunshine, Cate Blanchett for Notes on a Scandal, and winning the Oscar was Jennifer Hudson for her dynamic performance in Dreamgirls. Jennifer Hudson also became the 15th person to win an Academy Award for their debut film performance. Okay, V, you're experienced at this point. You're a pro, so why don't you get us underway with your category? Before you give us your nominees and your winner, feel free to throw any honorable mentions in there as well.
Yeah, so for my honorable mentions, I have Maribel Verdú for Pan's Labyrinth, Jodie Foster for Inside Man, and Toni Collette for Little Miss Sunshine. They all obviously they're all very good actresses and do very well in their movies, but there's just a little bit more for the rest, and actually some of them do kind of reflect the Academy's pick. So going into my 5, I have Abigail Breslin for Little Miss Sunshine, Kikuchi for Babel, Jennifer Hudson for Dreamgirls, Emily Blunt for Devil Wears Prada, and then I have a winner for Meryl Streep, Devil Wears Prada.
Okay, what is it about Streep that has you picking her as the winner in this category?
Well, one of the kind of like overarching themes of your show, Andrew, is what is standing the test of time. And this performance is standing the test of time. A lot of the other films that we're discussing, while especially people our age, if we mention them, they might kind of be like, oh yeah, I kind of remember, but everyone knows The Devil Wears Prada. Everyone knows Miranda Priestly, even if they've never sat through the film. She's kind of become a meme in and of herself, of just different moments that have become iconic and immortalized. And I think she does a really good way of crafting this character where she has her own little ticks, like the way she takes off her glasses. It's the same way every time. If it's sunglasses or reading glasses, she just like whips them off the exact same way. I really enjoy that. And that there's just subtle mannerisms that she very clearly crafted to become this person. And I like that. I think a less talented actress could go to like J.K. Simmons and Whiplash, like, and just be kind of like yelling and screaming and kind of demanding, but she's like a softer demanding. She's so, I guess, in her own power that she will make demands to Emily and Andrea, but she's not, yelling at them or hovering over them and being like this force. She's just sort of like, that's all, and that's enough to terrify someone. Is like her little like, that's all, or that wasn't a question, or why is no one ready, is like the most aggressive her voice ever really gets. And I like that she became like a very distinct person. I feel like you could meet Amanda Priestley in real life, where some of the other characters of this year, not so much.
Now, obviously, she was actually nominated in lead actress. You moved over into supporting. I assume you have Anne Hathaway as a contender in lead actress versus. Okay. Do you think Streep would have won in real life if she had put herself in the supporting actress category?
Yes, it's one of those things like, this comes up a lot in your show of like who is supporting, who is the lead. But I think the story is Andrea's story. It is not Miranda's story. And I think that's, in my opinion, as a writer, that's how the line should be divided. Even though she is the quote devil in Prada herself, she she doesn't grow or change that much. Maybe she has a tad bit more respect for Andrea at the end of the movie, but she's not suddenly like, oh, I'm going to leave the fashion industry or treat my assistants better or have a whole new outlook on life, where Andrea has a whole new outlook on life by the time she's done with her year at Runway Magazine. So that's why I think she would have won, because while these other women are excellent, I think Miranda Priestley would have swiped this category if she had put herself up for it.
It's hard to argue with that. I think Streep definitely would have done herself a lot of favors putting herself in this category versus lead in that year. Okay, Meryl Streep's on the board. Great pick there. She's going to do really well in the online vote. I have no doubt about that. That's a good choice. All right, Daniel, let's go over to you. If you have any honorable mentions, feel free to shout them out, and then let's Let's see what 5 women you have and who you have winning.
I struggled more with the supporting actress than I did with the supporting actor, I think. I think on the Meryl Streep thing, we'll touch on later on, even though, well, despite these arguments, which is compelling, to be fair, I do agree. But I will discuss Meryl in a later category, I'll say that. However, there is also the whole thing with category fraud. There is an obvious omission from my 5. I mean, one honourable mention I have in is Kate Blanchett for Notes on a Scandal, who I think is good. It's a very, it's a sort of solid. It's not. I don't love it. I think it's a solid film. I think it's a good small British piece of melodrama. And I think her and Judi Dench are good in it, but not great. But then the 5 actual nominees, with an obvious omission, which we'll get on to, are Toni Collette in Little Miss Sunshine, Abigail Breslin in Little Miss Sunshine, Adriana Barraza for Babel, Sharika Epps for Half Nelson, and then the winner I have Rico Kikuchi for Babel.
Okay.
My winner.
So what
So
is it
there's
about her and that performance in Babel that stands out versus the rest of the cast?
I think from when I first watched Babel, I say Babel. But I remember when it came out. Obviously, it came out the year after Crash had won. And there's some narrative similarities between Crash and Babel. Babel's like a better version of Crash. I feel, and it's got bigger scope. It's obviously, it's not just in Los Angeles. It's over multiple countries, over multiple continents. And I think the ensemble's a lot stronger. I think, out of the ensemble, which has got, you've got your Gael Garcia Bernal and Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett, who were like your heavy hitters in there. I think Adriana Barraza and Rico Kikuchi are the 2 that I remember when I first watched it when I was 13, 14, to even rewatching it in recent years, that the 2 standouts. I think their stories, obviously, Kate Blanchett's mostly sidelined to most of them. So, to be honest, once she, gets shot, Brad Pitt is decent. I'll find this old grief-stricken husband while that's going on, while dealing with that drama. I think Adriana Barraza dealing with the kids in Mexico, I think, is a good story. Or Rika Kikuchi, I think, with her, I think, even though she's not deaf in real life as an actress, like, we've seen with Marley Matlin in Children of Lesser God and stuff, and then obviously with Coda a couple of years ago. I think, the sign language work she does in that, and I think just her character is just, she has this confidence about her on the surface. Like when she's out socialising, she comes across confident when she's in like the arcade and she's flirting with boys and stuff. She does have that confidence. But then as soon as her disability comes up, you just see she just crumbles. And it is subtle. It's like what V was talking about with Meryl Streep. It's in comparing her performance with like J.K. Simmons with Whiplash, which is this louder, bigger performance. Meryl Streep's subtleties are what make her, iconic, especially in that role in The Boy Prada. I always think of the bit where she, right at the end, when she eyes up and down, and halfway as she walks away, she like just eyes up and down like. But I think Rika Kikuchi's a very subtle performance. Obviously, she's a very desperate teenager who's, has no family. Her father's never there. He's always gallivanting with his businesses and selling guns to people in Morocco and so on. And I think, she just needs that attention and she seeks it from anyone who she can get it from. And she goes to desperate measures sometimes, but she's a tortured individual. And sometimes it makes her confident and sometimes she just crumbles. And I think it's a devastating performance. And I think out of all them sort of branching storylines, I think it's fitting that the film ends with her character. It's the closing scene. The camera pans away from the apartment balcony of their fathers. And it doesn't end with, Brad Pitt. It doesn't end with one of the bigger names. I think it's telling that, in your reason, shows that movie story on that she gets to that final bit of closure. And I think it's the most compelling performance of the multiple. And the obvious admission from my nominees here was Jennifer Hudson, which I will.
I assumed Hudson was going to be potentially moved in another spot because I was a little surprised she wasn't there, but it makes sense now.
Yeah, and I think talking on the point of Meryl Streep winning support if she was in there, I think even though Rico Kikuchi my pick, I think if Meryl was in supporting, say if she swapped with Jennifer Hudson, say if Jennifer Hudson was in lead and Meryl Streep was in supporting, I think she would have won. On the day, I think she absolutely would have won. I think if she was up against Jennifer Hudson, I don't know. But I think if they swapped them, I think she should be ahead of them.
Yeah, I think that's a really compelling argument if Streep would have campaigned there because Hudson obviously had a lot of push that year and was a fantastic performance. If they were both competing against each other, it's probably a 50-50 coin flip on who would have won on the day. But if they had flipped to who was in lead versus who was in supporting, I think Streep would have been the favorite if she wasn't competing against Hudson in support.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got Rinko Kikuchi, we've got Meryl Streep. Let's go to mine really quickly, and then we'll finish things off. So here's my honorable mentions. I've got 3 women I want to shout out. First one is Martina Gedik from the film The Lives of Others. Really, yeah, it was a very complex, interesting film.
Yeah,
I do enjoy it. It just wasn't quite in my top 5. Next one's going to be Jodie Foster for Inside Man. That movie's a little showy, and the performances are all a little showy, but I like Jodie Foster a lot, and so I appreciated her kind of breaking up the male-oriented scope of that film, and so it was nice to see her get some love there. And then my third honorable mention, and this just comes down to she's not in the film enough, Julianne Moore in Children of Men. If she had additional screen time, I would have absolutely put her in there because her impact is very significant in that film. She just, for people who have not seen Children of Men, she's not in it as much as other characters, and I'll leave it at that. So here are the 5 women I've got for 2006 in alphabetical order by film, which is the way I always do it. So I have 2 women from Babel. I have Adriana Barraza and Rinko Kikuchi, just like Daniel did. I have Jennifer Hudson for Dreamgirls. I've got Sharika Epps for Half Nelson. I thought I might be the only one with Sharika Epps, so nice that she also got another shout out. And then but so good. She's unbelievable in that movie. And then my 5th nominee is Toni Collette for Little Miss Sunshine as well. I love Toni Collette. I've got a ton of respect for Jennifer Hudson, who won the award. I love Toni Collette. One day, one episode, I'm going to give Toni Collette my win. It's not going to be here, though. The 3 women for me that really stood out in this one were Barraza, Kikuchi, and Epps. I was close to giving Sharika Epps the win because what she does, kind of going toe-to-toe with Ryan Gosling in that film, only being a 17-year-old actress at the time, is really impressive. If you have not seen Half Nelson, especially if you're a fan of Ryan Gosling, make time to check out that film. It's a compelling story about a teacher and addiction, and I would recommend going and checking out that movie. But my win's going to go to Adriana Barraza in Babel. It was really tough. Kikuchi was in the conversation, but especially kind of in the cultural and societal moment we're in right now, it's hard not to be kind of confronted with the situation with El Salvador right now and sort of the way the American political movement is dealing with immigration. And so I found the struggle of the character that Barraza plays in that movie to be really endearing to me, even more so than it's ever been. I find her arc familiar. I worked in restaurant management for the better part of 10 years of my life, and I spent a lot of time with people from Central America, South America. I know the story and the struggles of immigration and trying to make a better life here in America, and just everything that Barraza's character does in that movie just really pulls at my heartstrings. And so it was hard for me to overlook kind of the personal connection to that. If you're not familiar with Barraza's work, I'd also recommend checking out Iñárritu's Amores Perros, which is another really great performance she's in. And I completely forgot about it until this week. I forgot she's in Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell, which is one of my favorite recent horror films. I think she's like the psychic medium in that movie, and
She is.
yeah, she's really great in that. And so I kind of forgot how diverse her career has been. Baratza is really good in Babel for me, and unfortunately, I think the problem is Daniel and I are going to probably end up splitting some of the Babel vote when we get to the social media vote there. But
that might have been a problem that the two actresses had 20 years ago. She's coming with joint nominees from the same film. You get a struggle.
That was my other thing I was going to ask you both about was, I assumed that they probably split votes at the time. Do you both think that was probably the case? Like when you have two people in such an ensemble, the whole film is an ensemble effectively, and when you've got two nominees in there, it really is hard to differentiate one from the other. Would you, Daniel, agree with that they probably just ended up splitting votes back in the day?
I think they did split. I think they would have split votes like the split us here. So if we can just do it just between the two of us, you take into the many Academy voters, I think it's likely the split votes. But I think regardless of the vote splitting, I still think the film still would have been too strong. I think even if just one of them was there, which either or, I still think Jennifer Hudson would have. I reckon she got more than the two from Band put together. I'd imagine in the voting.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Now, V, you have Jennifer Hudson in your 5. You obviously didn't have her winning. Do you have any huge issue with her having won on that night? I assume not, since you have her as one of your 5 nominees.
No, because actually Dreamgirls was the first movie on the list that I watched because I wanted to like start off with like something that I like musicals, so something that I knew I at least would like even if it wasn't like the movie for me. And I was really blown away by how good her performance is. So I would really taken with a lot of aspects of that movie, and it's kind of gone like by the wayside a little bit. Like people don't talk about it, especially in terms of like, oh, the greatest movie musicals. And it may not be the greatest, but it was still really good. And I actually found it more like emotional or moving than I was expecting it to be. I would, if there was no Meryl Streep or Emily Blunt, I would totally think she would get it, no problem.
Yeah, it was really surprising to me when I pulled that bit of trivia that this is the only film that's ever been the most nominated film on an Academy Award night and not get a Best Picture nominee. I had no idea that was the case. And to your point, it does feel like Dreamgirls has just become a forgotten film in a very short period of time. I never hear people talk about it. I never see people mentioning it on social media. And it's just one of those movies stuck in 2006 at this point still, which may have been different had Eddie Murphy won an Oscar for it as well, and sort of like had a renaissance with his career, which we'll get to here in a moment, probably. Okay, so we've got 4 options when we get to social media in supporting actress. You can side with V. She has Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. You can side with Daniel, who's got Rinko Kikuchi in Babel. I've got Adriana Barazza, also in Babel. And then the Academy has Jennifer Hudson in Dreamgirls. So really good choices there. Happy to see any of those 4 women getting the win on the social media vote. Let's go over to supporting actor now. Okay, the 5 gentlemen in 2006 who were nominated are Jaimin Unsu for Blood Diamond, Mark Wahlberg for The Departed, Eddie Murphy for Dreamgirls, Jackie Earle Haley for Little Children, and the award that year was given to Alan Arkin for his performance in Little Miss Sunshine. All right, Daniel, we're going to go over to you first on this one. Honorable mentions, and then who do you have nominated and winning?
See, I'm amazed that we've got 3 separate winners for supporting actors, which I was struggling to expand on as much as supporting actor, which is impressive that we've 4 split votes and none of us have gone with Jennifer Hudson. Whereas looking at supporting actor, even now I'm even thinking about switching stuff up, looking at my list. So I'm going to stick with it. So my honourable mentions: Paul Dano from Little Miss Sunshine, Steve Carell from Little Miss Sunshine, Jackie Earle Haley from Little Children, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch from The Departed, who surprised they got in. I also have Jack Nicholson as an honourable mention, who was the one you'd think would get in. It's Mark Wahlberg he comes and goes in the film. He's out basically the whole final act, apart from the final scene. But he's probably, along with Boogie Nights, he's best ever performance, I'd say. It's not as good as his performance in Movie Nights, which is one of my all-time favourite films. But it's a funny performance. It's it's like, it's purposely comedic, but he's like this intimidating figure, like he is. It's the one time where he sort of uses his own mannerisms, like you see in a lot of films, down to the best effects, I think, where it really benefits him. And then the final honourable mention, who is the one that nearly put in, is Sebastian Koch in The Lives of Others, who plays the playwright who is under surveillance by the Stasi. I think, we'll get on to the film maybe more later, but I think his performance, I think that final scene in The Lives of Others, when he finds out that, having felt he was never under surveillance by the Stasi, despite his, West German connections and so on, his posting of the hidden suicide figures during the East German under East Germany. I think that final scene when he realizes that he was under surveillance and that the Stasi officer, played by Ulrich Mueller, basically protected him, and then he leaves the sort of thank you note in the book that he publishes. I think that final scene, it's very, for a film that's quite heavy, quite bleak visually and topically, I think it's quite heartwarming moment in gesture in a film like that, and I think it's a very good support performance. But I do have him just missing out. I think the five I have it, I think four in particular are they're like the supporting performances where they're the performances I remember, which is what I always think the best supporting performances are when you think like Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men, or J.K. Simmons, or Christoph Waltz's Two Wings and stuff, where you think of that supporting performance ahead of the leads. And I think with four of mine, I think that's or definitely three of them. So on my five nominees, I have Jamal Honsu for Blood Diamond, who you could is the lead, really. I'd nearly put him in the lead. I mean, you've got Leo in there, but it's Jamon. The most compelling story, Jamon Honso, his son, trying to save his son from, this Sierra Leone warlord, basically, from slavery, and being like a soldier boy. Then I've got Eddie Murphy from Dreamgirls, which, was a big revival, big comeback for him. And obviously, when he didn't win on the night, he walked out. Obviously, he walked out, never to be seen again, which probably didn't do in the revival. He's come back, and it probably didn't help with any potential future works that might come up. Might not have done no, but anyway. And then I have Alan Arkin, who won, obviously. While I think he's worth a nomination, I don't think he's worthy of the win. I think it's a good comedic performance that obviously progresses Abigail Breslin's character on a lot. I think there's not much more to it than that, but I think it's a good performance in a legacy win. One of a few legacy wins in nominations from this year, I think. Then I also have Sergio Lopez from Pan's Labyrinth, who plays the Captain Vidal. And I think I remember when I watched that film, it's one of my all-time favourites. And I remember watching that as a kid, well, when I was 13. I remember just thinking, this fascist Spanish Civil War captain, he's a real piece of shit. He is an icon. I think he's an iconic villain in this role. And I wasn't familiar with him. I remember at the time, I think he's like mostly over comedic stuff, or he was. And this is like a bit of a change in role for him, I think. But I remember watching that and just thinking, when he's slapping Ophelia and like just being a right sod to her, I think this guy, he's a piece of work, and I think that is just enough to have him in. I just hate him. Some of the best performances, villainous performances, like even Imelda Staunton in Harry Potter, the ones that you really hate, are the best ones because you just want to punch him in the face. He has that quality. And then, but my winner have is Stephen Graham from England. So obviously Stephen Graham is like he'd been in stuff before that. He'd been in Snatching and stuff and Gangs of New York, and he was in. But this was really his big breakout on like definitely in the UK film scene. He's like a major player. Obviously, he's gone on to do great things since. Obviously, he's just had Adolescence come out, which obviously done really well. I'm not sure how well it's done in the States. It's done very well here.
Done well here too.
Yeah, so obviously he ran that. He wrote it, part of the brains behind that, and then obviously he's in it. But in This Is England, a powerful film, really great film to do with, corners of English society, see people from different backgrounds and, that racist attitude towards them. You get parties now like Reform UK, you try and bring back to that. But his performance is combo, there's a good, he brings a lot to it. Like, he don't come into the film until about halfway in. He's absent. He's not even mentioned. He's not even there. They don't even talk about it. He just comes in. He just explodes in halfway into the house where the friends are. Because the first half of This Is England is almost like a coming of age comedy drama. It's quite pleasant. It's quite funny. Just watching this young lad played by Thomas Turgoose, just growing up with these skinheads in the 80s who take him in and they're just like hanging around and chilling in Sheffield, I think, is it? Sheffield? Well, somewhere, I think it's not it's hard to tell because their accents are all over the place. Because you've got Joseph Gilman, who's from Yorkshire, and then you've got Stephen Graham comes in, and obviously he's got his thick Liverpudlian Scouse accent. And well, when he comes into that film, that from the second he enters the film changes, completely changes. It completely changes to what it's about. Tonally, it changes. He has these funny moments. He brings some levity at times because of the sort of loud personality that his character has. But then he has that hint in him that you can see when he first comes in, even when he's quite a jovial introduction, even though he is a bit of a trick with someone brandishing a machete. So I don't know if you can call it that jovial, but you can see in his eye he has that potential to flip on a dime. Like, he just has that natural intensity to him that you just can't take your eyes off him because you're worried for what he's going to do in that performance. I'm watching that when I mentioned before about the films that I've sort of seen differently as I've gotten older. But at the time, thinking that was just like such a powerful film when I was young because not much older than the lead character. But seeing it older now, just think that performance, it just still stands out. And it's still, the film still stands the test of time. It's set in the 80s, came out in 2006, and I think it is impactful and powerful now. It speaks equally about British culture today as it did in 2006. And that's why I'd have Stephen Graham as the winner for it.
I love the pick because I have been on the Stephen Graham bandwagon since Snatch in 2000. And I mean, like, Boiling Point is one of the films that I always recommend people see. It's a really fantastic film by him. I will say, though, that I do not have Stephen Graham even in contention. And the reason is, and this always happens every single episode I do, where there will be these movies that are like tweeners, where like they come out in some areas in one year and the other. So like I was like, I already had a ton. To your point, Daniel, this category is stacked. I have like 50 guys on my sheet here. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna roll This Is England into whenever I do 2007 down the road because
Okay.
So I'm glad you brought Stephen Graham to the table. So I'll probably praise him on a future episode when I do 2007 and really dive into This Is England because I love that movie. I love him in that film. I'm so glad that Adolescence is doing well. It's the best TV I've seen this year by a mile. So I'm thrilled that Stephen Graham is kind of living in this moment right now, which is excellent. So I think you're going to do very well when we get to social media on that pick, just because he's really having a moment. So I love that choice. All right, well, let's get to my five. Then we'll go to Vita to round us out for this category. A couple honorable mentions really quickly. I'm always going to give comedy a little bit of a moment here. And so Shake and Bake. I got John C. Reilly for Talladega Nights. Just on the honorable mentions, I just wanted to say that, like, I didn't consider John C. Reilly a comedic actor up until he butted heads with Will Ferrell, and became he sort of got typecast in that area. And then I feel like John C. Reilly he's had a hard time breaking away from being known as that guy from Talladega and Step Brothers because he's so funny in those movies. I've got Brad Pitt in Babel as an honorable mention. He's good. To your point, Daniel, you mentioned it earlier. It's not a great Brad Pitt performance, but it's good. He certainly has an impact on the film, but there's just other actors around him who are doing more, so he couldn't get in my 5. And then, even though V didn't watch Casino Royale, which I understand why, I've got Mads Mikkelsen. He's one of the better Bond villains for me. He's diabolical, and this is pre Hannibal, which is for me the most impressive acting that Mads Mikkelsen's ever done is on the Hannibal television series. And so I really love what Mads Mikkelsen does in Casino Royale, but there's other things that I prefer him in, so he didn't quite make my 5. Here's the 5, though, that I have for this category. I've got Jack Nicholson and Mark Wahlberg for The Departed. Nicholson's just like a tour de force in that movie. He's and kind of like Wahlberg, he's sort of bringing a lot of Jack to the role, but it works in the film.
Yeah.
The Wahlberg one's tough. I nominated him in my 5, but I don't know how much acting he's doing. I just feel like he's kind of being Mark Wahlberg, for better or worse, which is interesting. But I had to give him in there because he does stand out in that film. Third nominee is going to go to James McAvoy for The Last King of Scotland. Love James McAvoy. Fourth nominee is going to go to Alan Arkin for Little Miss Sunshine. Fifth nominee is going to go to Doug Jones for Pan's Labyrinth. Okay, so let me break down these 5 real quick. Alan Arkin, he's fantastic in Little Miss Sunshine, but he's in the film for like only 30% of the movie, and then his character's no longer in the film, and so I don't think he has enough impact on the totality of that movie for me. I think Wahlberg and Nicholson are terrific in The Departed, but that movie is significantly more about Damon and Leo and the turn and the flip and everything that's happening there. And then I want to take a second to talk about James McAvoy, who I think is criminally underrated still to this day. I have never seen a bad James McAvoy performance. I think that he is a fascinating figure. I know he does a lot of theater work over in England, and I feel like because he does so much theater work, he doesn't do enough film roles to really get talked about. But I want to say what he does in Last King of Scotland, sort of being the POV for us as an audience to kind of understand what's happening with the world that Forrest Whitaker's character is sort of building and the facade he's putting up. We're sort of living vicariously through James McAvoy, and I think he pulls that off really well. But I'm going to give my win to Doug Jones for Pan's Labyrinth. And I'm hoping V really likes this pick because I know she's a Pan's Labyrinth person, or at least a Guillermo person. I don't feel like the work that Doug Jones has done throughout his career has ever really gotten significant recognition. And it's kind of like, for me, what Andy Serkis does with motion capture, where it's sort of like people compartmentalize those things and they're like, oh, they're not actors, they're doing something else. And what Doug Jones does in Pan's Labyrinth, playing 2 different characters, mind you, he's playing both the Pale Man and the Faun, which are significantly different characters doing different things. His body language is completely different. He's buried in prosthetics, and he still conveys a lot with his eyes, with his body movement. I love what Doug Jones has done. He's been in Hellboy. He's been in the Fantastic Four movie, which is not good, but he plays the Silver Surfer. He's been in Crimson Peak, which V and I talked about on the 2015 episode. He's obviously most known probably for his work in 2017's The Shape of Water. He plays the main monster character in that. Yeah, but when I think of Doug Jones, I think about the Faun character and the Pale Man. Those are 2 different roles, they're different characters, and he just brings a level of nuance to those monsters that I don't think has ever really gotten recognition. So I'm probably not going to win this vote, and I don't care. I just want to give Doug Jones a chance to like have his moment here on this show. So he's going to get my win. Doug Jones, Pan's Labyrinth. Okay, V, let's go over to you, and who do you have in the category?
This one was a very tough category. I wanted to give a lot of, especially the comedy or rom-com stuff, more attention, but it's hard because some of these other performances are so good. So just because I'm really biased, one of my just missed it is Jack Black in The Holiday. I know the movie is kind of corny, but I'm a Jack Black stan. I love him. The fact that people like say he's not, like people like, oh, he shouldn't be a romantic lead is ridiculous because he's hilarious and women like funny guys. So I just don't know why people act like he shouldn't have been in this movie because I think he just brings, like, he's like sunshine. He brings just a ray of goofiness to every movie, but you know, I really couldn't put him in the real stuff. And there's just a split between, you know, um, the two sort of side male characters in The Devil Wears Prada, Adrian Grenier and Stanley Tucci. They both are great. They both like are, you know, understand the assignment. They really embody their character very well, and they fill out Andrea's sort of, you know, life both in and outside of Runway. But you know, again, there was just stronger choices. Getting into my stronger choices, I am going to give John C. Reilly a nomination. I love him so much, so much. I don't watch Will Ferrell movies unless he's in them. I think he's, no offense, Will Ferrell, I think he's better of a comedic talent, and I think he balances out, because I think Will can get a little too crazy, and I feel like John pulls him in a little bit, or they just have such good chemistry that I just don't like the kind of the bro comedies that came out around this time are generally not my thing, but Talladega Nights and Step Brothers are ones that I actually enjoy, and it's all because of John C. Reilly, really. Then I've got Jack Nicholson for The Departed. Obviously, he's a powerhouse, but I don't think this was A, his best work, and B, I just don't think it was that interesting of a role. And so I do have Doug Jones. I was like on the fence about putting him because of the same thing. Some people kind of consider it a different type of acting, but he's basically the face of Pan's Labyrinth when we think about this movie. This famous thing is like what everyone thinks of, and if he wasn't good in those roles, the movie would fall apart. Like if you're not scared of the fawn or any of the characters, like it would not be a good movie. And he's very you know, he's very scared, but he also, because he plays so many of these different monsters, each monster feels different throughout his filmography. So I'm glad that we both agree that he, you know, should deserve some more recognition. Then I've got let's see. Oh, sorry, I moved this. Toyoshi Ihara for Letters from Iwo Jima. We'll get more into that movie later, but I just found almost all of the characters and the performances in that movie to be very moving. And I am correcting history with Eddie Murphy as my winner for Dreamgirls. I actually didn't even know about this controversy because, you know, this was my first movie that I had watched for this. And when I saw him in this, I was like, oh, I think I had my best supporting actor. And it stayed true pretty much the whole time. There were, you know, other times where I was like, maybe, I don't know, but just like reviewing some of his scenes a few days ago, I was just like, yeah, that's the one I like the most. I am bummed, and I'm sure was very bummed that he didn't get it, and I don't know why. You know, I feel like even though he didn't win it, he still should have had a bit more of a revival because he's just such a talented person.
Yeah, he was cleaning up in the awards leading up. I think he had won almost every precursor up until the Oscars. It was a really jarring win for Arkin versus him.
It was a mad one. It was definitely surprising, and probably why he left. I can't remember it fell in the telecast, but it's usually early. It might be first. They usually get it out early, don't they? So if it was first, and he's just gone off the bat, then well, man, that point sucks on.
Well, and I always go back and I'll go to YouTube and I'll watch all the awards and I'll watch the winners and the speeches and all that stuff. And I was really trying to keep an eye on Eddie Murphy and his reaction when Arkin's name got read. And he definitely has a moment on camera for a second where you can tell he's like, this is freaking crazy that I'm not getting my name called right now. It was pretty jarring. And I was concerned because I knew I wasn't going to pick him because I thought Doug Jones was needing attention. I was concerned that Eddie Murphy might not be getting an opportunity to go to the vote. So I'm really glad, V, that you have brought him to the forefront with this opportunity. Okay, so we've got this is 2 categories now where we've got 4 different options, which may end up being a theme for the course of this episode, which I think kind of sums up how varied 2006 was. And I think that it's also an indicator that the 3 of us are not necessarily aligning with what actually won that year, which again, I think makes sense. So the 4 options that people can vote for when we get to social media, they can go with Daniel's pick. He's got Stephen Graham in This Is England. They can go with my pick. I've got Doug Jones in Pan's Labyrinth. V, of course, has Eddie Murphy in Dreamgirls, and the Academy that year had Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine. I honestly have no idea who's going to win that, but that'll be a fun one. Okay, Best Actress. Let's get to the next one. So in 2006, the nominees that year were Meryl Streep for The Devil Wears Prada, Kate Winslet for Little Children, Judi Dench for Notes on a Scandal, Penelope Cruz for Voltaire, and the Academy crowned Helen Mirren for her role in The Queen. I'm going to start things off in this category, and then I'll go over to the two of you. So my honorable mentions in lead actress are, I've got Abigail Breslin in Little Miss Sunshine as an honorable mention. I felt she was more of a lead than a supporting, and I felt like it was one of those scenarios where they tend to give child actors supporting nominees, and they rarely will let a child be like a lead. And I just thought the Breslin's character was a lead for me. So I had her an honorable mention. And then I've got Judi Dench and Cate Blanchett both as honorable mentions in Notes on a Scandal. I think it's kind of a two-hander. And Daniel, to your point earlier, I think that movie's a good movie, but it's not. I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed it on a revisit, having not seen it in a long time, but I didn't think it was quite in that upper echelon of movies that really needed to be in this best of conversation. So I've got both of them in honorable mentions, not quite up there all the way. So here are the 5 women I've got nominated. I've got Claire Hope Ashity in Children of Men. I've got Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. I've got Laura Dern in Inland Empire. Apologies, V. I've got Ivana Baquero in Pan's Labyrinth. And I've got Penelope Cruz in Voltaire. So I totally understand why Streep would be an option for supporting. I just felt like I would leave her in the lead because it just made the most sense to me. If you could twist my arm pretty easily and have me put her in supporting. I felt like she was more of a lead to me, so that's why I have her there. Don't have an issue with her being in the supporting category though. Inland Empire is not my favorite David Lynch. It's towards the back end of my Lynch rankings. However, I think Laura Dern is the most interesting and complex character on film in that movie, and so I felt like she at least needed to be in this conversation. I'm also a really big fan of Penelope Cruz, and I think Voltaire is a deserving nomination, but it came down to 2 women for me. It came down to Claire Hope Ashity in Children of Men, and then Ivana Baquero in Pan's Labyrinth. I think Ashity is really, really good in Children of Men. She, for people who are not familiar, plays the only pregnant person on Earth, and the film sort of follows her journey through trying to find a safe place for herself to have a child. And I really resonated with her journey, and that film's really complex in terms of it doesn't really tell you who's good and who's bad. It's a lot of gray, and she's having to make a lot of choices for her own safety that I think are really interesting and nuanced and complex. And there's two scenes that stand out for me in that film that really highlights her acting performance. Number one is the famous scene where she's giving birth with just a one-shot take. That she and Clive Owen are really kind of in that moment, and that scene really stands out to me. And then, of course, the final scene where she's on the boat and sort of dealing with everything at the very end, and that really moves me a lot. So she had to be there. But I'm going to give my win to Ivana Baquero for Pan's Labyrinth. She's the child that played the lead actor Ophelia in the movie. I also think Guillermo del Toro has a really good eye for child acting performances. He pulled it off with The Devil's Backbone, where he's got young children playing it. He's pulled it off in other areas, but I think Ophelia is a brilliant central performance. She conveys innocence in a really great way. It's an 11-year-old girl playing this role, and the movie really hinges. The fact that Guillermo had the confidence to have his movie hinge on an 11-year-old's performance and it hold up the way it has, and the stuff that she has to see and deal with and go through. She's this light of hope and inspiration, and I'm just so impressed with the young actress who plays that role. And I felt that Ivana Baquero really needed to be in the conversation when we get to social media. I think it's one of the best child acting performances of all time, and it never gets mentioned up there with all of the great child actors. I just came off 1999 talking about Haley Joel Osment, which is a deserving child acting performance as well, but I think that this one needs to be in the conversation as well. Okay, V, I'm going to go over to you next. So, what
right.
women do you have nominated?
So, someone who was sort of a runner-up that didn't make the cut is Kirsten Dunst. I'm sort of on the fence with her at performance in any movie. There are movies where I really like her, or scenes where I'm like, oh, this is really good. And then there's times where I don't particularly care for her performance. So it's sort of, like 60, 40, 70, 30, like of much I enjoy her. So that's why she's not fully up there. And then for my actual nominees, I have Anne Hathaway for Devil Wears Prada, Jodie Whittaker for Venus, Ivana Baccarat for Pan's Labyrinth, Helen Mirren for The Queen, and my winner is Judi Dench in Notes on a Scandal. I actually really enjoyed this movie. I like when actresses, especially as I guess they're getting older, but at any age, are not afraid to not be glamorous. Like, she's terrifying and awkward and weird in this movie. I also enjoy that there's a good portion of this movie that's voiceover of her diary, and I think she does a great job of just the narration and it matching up to like what's going on, which I think could be a little difficult. And she's just generally a powerhouse of an actress. So it really became these two great British actresses were hard to pick from. And Helen Mirren was great. I really enjoyed The Queen. I felt like there were times where I thought I was watching a documentary and I had to like remember that I was like, oh, this is actually a movie. This is not actual footage of the Queen. She's very convincing. So I have no problem with her actually taking home the Oscar. I think that was great.
That is awesome. I love the Judi Dench pick because, I mean, I kind of know what I'm going to get from Cate Blanchett in terms of she's just very versatile and she's a chameleon. She can do a lot of different things. I didn't really know that Judi Dench had that in her locker. Like, that was just kind of a different approach to Judi Dench's acting than I was familiar with. And so I'm glad I went back and rewatched Notes on a Scandal and moved up on my Letterboxd rankings a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm glad to see her in the ring. I also really like the Jodie Whittaker shout there. I think she's the best part of Venus. Again, I don't like Venus necessarily, but I think she's really good in that film for sure. Okay, Daniel, let's see if you have the opportunity to make this another category with 4 different winners.
Well, we'll see what happens. I might just put this in a light on it, starting to give it dark. So I just thought, wow. Yes, this category, as we said, there's been cases of category fraud in where to play certain people. So I had, as my honourable mentions, you both had her in. I do love the film. It's one of my favourite of the films. I had an honourable mention of Ivana Baccarat as an honourable mention. I think she is great as Ophelia. I think, like you said, Andrew, it's one of the best young, lead performances. I think on any other year, I'd probably have her in. I think with this year, when you look at the actual nominees that the Oscars had, it couldn't be more of a typical Oscar 5 than the 5 actresses that are up. You've got 5 actresses who have been nominated multiple times. I don't know how many nominations they've got between the 5 of them, but obviously Meryl Streep alone has 22 or whatever she's on, 22, 20. Then the other 4 have got multiple as well. My other 2 honourable mentions are Laura Dern for Inland Empire, who, similar to yourself, I think it's not Lynch's best. It's definitely the one that is the less conventional, even for him, I think. But Laura Dern is a standout for me, and is one of the most tiring performances you will see, where she's doing so much from across the scale where you just knackered watching her. Like, it takes it out of you, the amount of stuff she's putting in. Like, I've never seen, until I watched Smile 2 with Naomi Scott in that, I was like, I've not seen a performance where someone just like, that must have been a hard shoot for them mentally. Like, when I watched Smile 2, it was like the same Naomi Scott, like, she must need some therapy after that film. But, and then Judi Dench was my other honourable mention, who I think Notes on the Scandal is a decent little, melodrama. I think she is a standout over Blanchett. It is her story, it's her diary. It's about her obsession, essentially, with this, younger teacher and all what happens regarding, obviously, the scandal itself. But, I've seen it with an affair with a younger person involved in Kate Blanchett's character. The drama unfolds from her knowledge of that and her obsession over Kate Blanchett in past obsession as well. And I think she is good. I think Judi Dench is one of them ones where, when you compare it to other veteran actresses like Helen Mirren and Meryl Streep, I don't think she's quite at that level. I think she's always good, Judi Dench. You know, she's great as her. She's done some great costume dramas in the past and present. And, you know, obviously she won for Shakespeare somehow. Don't know how that happened. She should have won for Mrs. Brown the year before, though. So I think that was sort of a redemption pick. And so my 5 nominees I actually have are Kate Winslet for Little Children. I think it's a great performance. I think Todd Field does really good game performances of his actors. He's only ever done 3 films still, somehow, in 24, 25 years. In all 3 films have been acting showcases. You've got In the Bedroom. There's a great performance in there from Tom Wilkinson, City Spacek. And then Little Children, there's a handful of performances that could have stuck into other categories. Jackie Hill Haley and Patrick Wilson were great, but just didn't get in. And then obviously Tar, the other year, Kate Blanchett, who's come up a lot in this podcast actually. She was great in Tar as well. I think, yeah, Todd Field does great with his performance, with his performers, and Kate Winslet, I think, is exceptional in Love Children. I think she really gets the balance of the tone right, where it is this melodrama. Is, you know, you've got really heavy subjects, but it sort of plays out almost like a soap, almost at times, like a soap drama, like Coronation Street or something. Like, would have it, but I think that she gets the balance well. And then I've also got Penelope Cruz from All There. I think, you know, with similar to Todd Field, I think Almodovar always, it's an acting showcase for whoever his lead is, often Cruz. He gets the best out of people, and particularly her. I think it's a great performance. It's another one as well with serious themes in it regarding like molestation and stuff, but it's darkly comedic at times. It's like it's, you know, Almanac this tendency to sort of plays, and I think similar to Winslet, she gets that tone just right. I think, even though there's serious subjects in there. Then I also have Helen Mirren for the Queen. I think it's just a by the book biopic. I think it's one of the better ones. Like what we said, she's just um, she's the Queen. I mean, some people might think of her before they think of the Queen herself. Like, once that performance came out, and she won, obviously, in the end for the Oscar for the performance, and she sweats, basically. But these 5 actresses who got in, they got in everywhere. It rarely had, there was like very little outside competition. I think all 5 got in at the Globes, the Critics' Choice, the BAFTA, the SAG. All 5 were everywhere, but Mirren won everywhere, apart from obviously at the Globes where you've got the comedy drama split. But I think she's exceptional. I think she really gets the Queen down. She's by far probably the only reason I'd say to watch the film. She sells the film herself. You know, I think that is the film's biggest selling point is her performance of Squealers and the second. And then the final 2 are obviously, she split categories. I've got Meryl Streep and Devil Wears Prada. Like we said in Supporting Actress, it is an iconic role. For these 5 performances that I have in, it's the one I've definitely seen the most. I only watched it fairly recently by chance, not, you know, because my girlfriend watches it quite a lot. I do like Devil Wears Prada, and she is exceptional in it. She's so iconic, and I think she very, very nearly took it for me. But similar to what's in Supporting Actress, if she was put up against a certain someone, would she have won? And I don't know if she would have done, what would have been interesting is I do have as my winner Jennifer Hudson. I think she was obviously Supporting Actress on the night. She's clearly the lead. I mean, it's a great performance. I think when you talk about the legacy nominations in the sort of like revival, like, the comeback in sort of redemption nominations of this year. I think her winning that Supporting Actress Oscar was, I mean, I've never really followed, obviously, American Idol, because we don't get it here, we have X Factor, which doesn't even go anymore. I remember watching this film when I was younger, and obviously seen it since, and just thinking how amazing she is. And even in like Cats, which is terrible, but she brings everything to Cats. She's the only person I feel really sorry for her, because she's there absolutely belting her heart out in that film. And then you've got James Corden in Rebel Wilson pissing about with it is really bad. I hope, she got some form of compensation for that. Because she's been done dirty, because she's always great in everything. She's such a great performer and musician. And I don't follow American Idol. But how we've had some terrible winners of the X Factor in this country, which is our equivalent. And if she was on the X Factor in the noughties, they would have just ended the show and just said they wouldn't even gone to the live shows. So how she didn't win American Idol, and from what I briefly looked into, she wasn't even close. She came out 9th or something. I'm like, how has that happened? I don't know what's going on there. I think that is a bigger scandal than whoever we talk about won this Oscar ceremony in 2006. I just don't know how she didn't win American Idol. It's a disgrace, to be honest. But I think she brings that, which people clearly knew about from the time of American Idol. It brought her acting game to it as well here. And it's just a standout. I think Eddie Murphy nearly gave the win to in supporting. If I was a voter in 2006 and Stephen Graham wasn't eligible because of US release dates, because it was a small English film, it would have been released a year later in the US. Eddie Murphy would have gotten the vote, probably. I think, here. Or in supporting actress, where she other than that, I think Jennifer Hudson is, by far, in my opinion, I'd have her ahead of the rest. Maybe not by far ahead of Meryl Streep, but by far ahead of the other three.
I've got some very interesting notes from that. So I never thought Cats would come up as much on this podcast. This is not the first time Cats has been mentioned on this show over a year and a half, and so I never expected Cats to be featured on this show multiple times. So that's funny. That's a dreadful movie. Tom Hooper should have his Oscar taken away and should never be allowed to be.
He should.
It's shocking. I also noted In the Bedroom. I haven't really mentioned In the Bedroom yet at this point. I like In the Bedroom, or pardon me, Little Children. I haven't mentioned Little Children that much. I'm going to be mentioning In the Bedroom in 2001, which I'm doing later this year, significantly more. So expect more Todd Field conversation for that one. I prefer In the Bedroom over Little Children. I think they're both really good.
Yeah, I think In the Bedroom's a stronger film. I think Little Children is good. I think Kate Winslet's performance is the best part of it. I think In the Bedroom is definitely, if this was a 2000 podcast, it would be in the conversation of maybe getting a 5, whereas Little Children, I don't think is.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think In the Bedroom is preferable to Little Children, and so that's why I've kind of left it off the conversation. And then Jennifer Hudson now has the opportunity to become the third person who can win both supporting and lead when we get to the online polls, which is always a fun little wrinkle that I never anticipated when I created this show. I never thought that we'd be nominating people in multiple categories, but it has come up. It's not going to be the first time. Anne Bancroft in The Graduate won lead and supporting. James Dean in Giant in 1956 won lead and supporting. So now Jennifer Hudson can also potentially win lead and supporting. So that's a funny little addition to this episode. And once again, we've got 4 different options when we get to social media. So this is just a continuing theme. You can go with my pick. I've got Ivana Baquero in Pan's Labyrinth. V has Judi Dench in Notes on a Scandal. Daniel's got Jennifer Hudson in Dreamgirls. And then the Academy has Helen Mirren in The Queen. Don't know who's going to win, but that'll be a fun battle between the 4 of those women. Okay, let's go over to Best Actor. This is going to be another interesting category. We'll see where things go. So the 5 nominees in 2006 in actor were Leonardo DiCaprio for Blood Diamond, Ryan Gosling for Half Nelson, Will Smith for The Pursuit of Happiness, Peter O'Toole for Venus, and then the win went to Forest Whitaker for his crowning achievement in The Last King of Scotland. It's also worth noting Peter O'Toole's loss meant that he becomes the most nominated performer without a competitive win, with 8 different nominations, never winning an Oscar in his life. V, we're going to go to you first to lead off on this one. Who do you have nominated and winning in Best Actor?
This one was really tough. There was a lot of standout male performances this year. So the ones that didn't make the cut was Jamie Foxx in Dreamgirls. I really enjoyed his performance, and I thought maybe he was going to make one of the higher ones, but there was just too many to pick from. Also, Rudy Youngblood from Apocalypto. It's really interesting because also they're speaking a language that is largely a dead language, and the film is also very, very terrifying, and also I think probably very technical to execute on. So I wish I had room for him higher. And then I was tossed up between both of the Clive Owens roles in Children of Men and Inside Man, and also Denzel in that as well. They're both really, really good. I just couldn't make a decision of which, Clive Owen movie or which character in that. So I was just sort of tossing them up, and I kind of just left them off. But for my actual picks, I have Leo for The Departed, Matt Damon for The Departed, Kazunori Niyomiya for Letters from Iwo Jima, Cillian Murphy for The Wind That Shakes the Barley, and I have Forrest Whitaker as the winner. So I'm agreeing with the Academy, which I don't think I have done thus far on this show. So this is my first agreement. I didn't see the movie when it came out, and so I remember there being a lot of buzz about this win, and then he kind of came out of nowhere and just sort of swept this in a way that a lot of people I think were expecting O'Toole or other people to take this, and I was kind of going and being like, is this going to be as good? Is this going to last? And yeah, from the second he gets on stage, I was just like, oh yeah, no, this checks out. This is why he won. He is so charismatic and also absolutely terrifying. And it's a great portrayal of a real life person, and also just how these types of people in third world countries can rise to power when there's this power vacuum, because they are a stage presence, they're friendly, they're meeting the locals, and the locals like them, and even this person who's a foreigner likes him and thinks, oh, what's the big deal working with him? You get to see the nasty side of him, and it's almost like, honestly, even though there's no romance, it honestly kind of reminds me of an abusive relationship where he's calling all hours and being demanding and oh, I thought you were going to be here for me. So I thought it was excellent, so he definitely deserves it.
Now you have Cillian Murphy second on your ranking list for Wind That Shakes the Barley. Was that a first time watch for you, or had you seen that prior?
That was the first time watch, and it definitely. No offense to the other men in that film and the few women, but it's very clearly why he's a star now. Not that those other guys are bad, but he definitely stood out as the performance. So he was not as well known. No Oppenheimer had happened yet and all that. So I get why he's famous now, or why he's such a big deal. And it's a very moving and upsetting story. So it was tough to watch another war movie, but it's yeah, I really enjoyed the whole thing. Was very good. The Departed, they're all of them are great. It's one of those, it's very similar to Big Short. There's a lot of male characters that are very hard to pick from. They're all very good, and it was difficult to pick between Leo and Matt, so I kind of just moved them down lower, and I was like, oh yeah, Forrest I think makes the most sense.
Where do you stand on Leo in Blood Diamond?
No, that doesn't even exist in my brain. I've wiped that out a little bit. I can't even, I mean, at least he tried, but there are moments where the accent completely isn't even there. When he's in the bar talking to, oh, I forget, is it Jennifer Connelly? Yeah, it's it's gone, and then it's back, and then when it comes back, it's strong, but it's wrong. It's strong and not the right accent. So it's just, yeah, it's just very, I mean, the subject matter is upsetting, but I just feel like he needed more time with a coach, or maybe they could have come up with some excuse for him to be an American in this part of the world. It's not, we get our paws and everything. So I don't think it would have been so odd for some sort of American to be working in this area. So the accent ruined it, and I just pretended I didn't watch it.
It almost turns into a comedy for me, where I'm just laughing at Leo the whole time because of how bad the accent is, and it comes and it dips and goes. But yeah, I'm with you on that, B. All right, Daniel, let's go over to you now to see where you stand on the Best Actor.
I think actress was a very strong year like 5 or 6 performances. I think actors are a lot weaker. I think there's 2 or 3 great. I think there's a lot of good though, but not great. I think the overall levels to where the better performers get to isn't as high as in the actress category. I think on the Leo thing as well. I mean, like he said, I don't know why they didn't just make him an American expat in Africa. I think I recall he's meant to be from like Rhodesia, which is Zimbabwe. Is where he's meant to be from. The film's set in like Sierra Leone, but he's meant to be from like Zimbabwe, I think. But he's just doing a very generic South African accent, I think is what he's going for. He sounds like he's auditioning for District 9. And if this District 9 was like 3 years later, if he did a better job, he got that role ahead of Charlton Copley, you never know. But like, yeah, it is very jarring. But because it's not such a serious film, it's sort of like a thriller in part, mostly. I think it sort of oddly suits the tone of the film because it's like this sort of high stakes thriller, but it's a very serious subject matter about like child trafficking and like getting pushed into warfare and stuff. And then obviously the use of slavery and buying and selling them blood diamonds. So for it to be this sort of like thriller, I think that just sort of works in a weird way that his accent's so bad. But he's not he's not my honourable mention, so he's not getting that high. I won't give him that much credit. So I did struggle more with this category. My 2 honourable mentions are Brad Pitt in Fable. Could be supporting actor, and it's a good performance, but it's not great, and he's not in it. It's more of a support. It's one of them films where you could say there isn't a lead. It's like everyone's supporting. Like you could say if they're supporting, who's the lead? But there's no one has that main central story or screen time to justify putting someone in lead. But I think just because of the name, he would probably build as the lead. I assume. So I've got him on as an honorable mention. I also have Greg Kinnear as an honorable mention for Lovely Sunshine. I think everyone, I know you've got Abigail Breslin in lead. I kept her in supporting, and it is her story, it's about her pageant. I love Lovely Sunshine. It's like this whole, like, the award season starts with Sundance, which is just before the upcoming Oscars, and more films out coming out of Sundance in the past 10 years. But so start to feed through to the Oscars, even though they're so far in advance. The one film I always think of before any other about Sundance to Oscar campaigning in Lonely Sunshine. It's like the typical, that's like what started this little indie comedy. It looks like an indie comedy, that's like one, but it's just such a sweet film. It's funny, but it's dead heartwarming. It's emotional. It's just, I don't know who couldn't like the film. It's one of those films, even if you don't love it, I think it's a hard film to hate, but we'll get onto that later on. But I think Greg Kinnear is a big part of that. I think Abigail Breslin brings this sweetness in naivety to her performance because she's like an 8-year-old girl, so a lot of this family drama, she just sat in the van, with her headphones on, listening to her MP3 player when they're all arguing or discussing the fact that Paul Dano's can't become a pilot because he's colourblind, or they're talking about Steve Carell's character having tried to kill himself, and she's like oblivious to all this family drama that's literally going on around her in this minivan. And then the one person who should be holding it together is Greg Kinnear, is the father of the family. You've got Tony Collette, basically tries to do the best she can and often goes to him like, sort this out. But he has this all what's going on takes a back seat to him. The pageant, Steve Carell's struggles, his son's struggles, his wife's struggles, everything. The only thing he cares about is that his dad behaves Alan Arkin and his failing pyramid scheme pitch to Bryan Cranston, who rocks up for one scene. And that was that's all he cares about the whole film. And I think it's a really good arc. And then obviously once that pitch goes and he finally sees the error of his ways and goes all in for the pageant a bit too much in what is one of the cringiest, in a good way, finales to a film ever during a pageant performance. But he does just miss out what I think out of all, but even though I have two of them in supporting actress, I do think Greg Kinnear is equally as strong as Toni Collette and Abigail Breslin, and I think he had the bigger character change out of the three. But he does just miss out, I think. So I have Leo in for The Departed, which was looking like that was going to happen. And then I think he just beat himself with Blood Diamond, and I don't know how that happened. I think he might have got in one other place with Blood Diamond, but he got in most places for The Departed and then just missed out to himself. Not sure why. I think I did read that they tried to last minute shift him to support him, so he didn't go against himself. So I think when it came to the voting, he was put in support. So that's why he missed out on actor for The Departed. So he didn't go against himself. So he did get Blood Diamond, but then he lost that to Mark Wahlberg anyway. So I think he left it too late. And then, but I do have him in. I think it's a good performance, especially given it's sort of like it's a Scorsese gangster criminal crime, sprawling crime drama. I think he does well, given it's not a character heavy driven drama. I think it's a good performance. And his accent works definitely better than it is in Diamond.
Unquestionably.
Then I have Will Smith's Pursuit of Happiness. I think this would be a film I'd be interested to revisit if or when I have children. Well, now I don't have any at the moment. It will be interesting to see. But it's a great performance. I remember at the time, I know he'd been nominated for Ali 5 years prior, in 2001, I think. I remember just thinking of Will Smith, just thinking of Men in Black Independence Day, Wild West. Famous role he accepted over The Matrix. And I'm just thinking, Will Smith wasn't like this serious actor, because I don't think I grew up watching Ali, I grew up with them. So to see when this came out, I would have been really amazed that he had this in him. And it's something he tried to repeat numerous times, like £7, and it's not quite worked. So obviously King Richard, he's good in. He's not as good as he is in this. I don't think in King Richard. I think that was sort of like a legacy thing. And it was also a bit of a weak year. But I think he's good. It's probably still his best performance today, I would say. But I don't have him winning, unfortunately. My third place person is Forrest Whitaker. I have him as third for his performances in the I think him and Helen Mirren this year were just unstoppable. I think the three of the acting categories were just shillings here. I imagine for Oscar voters at the time, with the exception of obviously supporting actor, which was a bit more, which seemed to be one until obviously Eddie Murphy lost that. I think he's great as Ian. I think he touched on most of it. Is this sort of like almost played out like a relationship where he's this, dominant force. He's got this charm. He's got this sort of like, the sort of thing that any politician or someone who's a president, as the president of Uganda, he's for like a facade, like for his international sort of how he's perceived. But then obviously James McAvoy's character, who's fictitious, made up to sort of like what you touched on about his performance. He's sort of invented from the source material to be like sort of our insight into Idi Amin in this sort of facade he had on publicly to what was actually going on in Uganda at the time. And I think once you start to see that culminating, obviously, the ultimate sort of failed invasion of Tanzania and the subsequent, getting dethroned and basically going into exile, I think that he has comedic moments, he has charming moments, he has really sinister moments. I think it's a good performance and one that I can see why it won 2016 and wouldn't be. I think these three now are the three that I think are great performances. I think the two that I've already nominated are good, but I'd say these three are great performances. So I'd have him at third. Second, I'd have Ryan Gosling and Half Nelson. I think him and Sharika Epps are just fantastic in this film. I think, it's Ryan Gosling I think Ryan Gosling's at his best. He's a good facial actor. he doesn't get enough roles to do with that. Obviously, the closest he probably ever come to winning was probably for Barbie. He was probably just missed out to Robert Downey Jr. He's probably the next in line to win, which is obviously an opposite performance to this. I mean, it's a big, loud, showy comedic performance. He is a good comedic actor as well. But I think his best performances are where he has a lot to say, but said very little. Like, even in Drive, he has about 10 lines of dialogue, probably. It's a lot of facial acting, a lot of subtle performances. I think Drive's a lot more subtle, but not as big and not as good a performance. I mean, I love Drive, but I think in Half Nelson, I think it's a good balance between, like, a powerful, like, spoken performance as well as mixing that subtlety of, hiding, not showing being, a teacher, how he's truly feeling and only open up to Cherie Krebs' character. And I think it is a heartbreaking role of addiction, and I think it is a really great performance in probably his best, I would say. And then as my winner, who I briefly mentioned earlier, the performance is also great, cut for its subtlety, is Ulrich Muir for The Lives of Others. I think it's a great performance. I think he doesn't say a lot because of the nature of his profession. You can compare it to like Gene Hackman in The Conversation, which plays a bit more of a thriller than this. I think just his body language and facial acting as he's spying essentially on Sebastian Kopp's playwright, and the emotional lengths he puts into when he sort of gets attached to this playwright and starts to sympathise for him and his girlfriend's situation during, the East-West Germany divide. I think it's a really great central performance with a lot of nuance to it, and it really elevates the film from this quiet sort of East German espionage, almost sort of drama to do with, hidden suicide figures and corruption during East Germany and how they would hide stuff, a bit similar to like North Korea do now, like a lot of secrecy in East Germany. And I think usually when it's portrayed in film or TV, it's almost like, it's more a villainous perception of East Germany. So like West Germany is like the fun, where you have freedom, and East Germany is like this grey, miserable. Think of like the imagery of something like In Possession, for example, which is like on the borders of East Germany. It's all grey and bleak, and whereas he brings a lot of warmth to it. I think he starts that he has this cult persona which he needs to get by with the nature of his role as a Stasi surveillance officer without getting ordered surveillance himself. And I think it's just a really great, it's like the art source performance, and I think it is a great performance. And I think if the film came out earlier in the States, I think it had a very late push. It only got the one nomination for film not in English language, which it won, which was a shock, I think, because Pan's Labyrinth got like 6 nominations, including screenplay and cinematography and makeup and everywhere. So the fact that it beat Pan's Labyrinth was like a shock. But I think it had this very, very late push, sort of similar to how, Amelia Perez lost, which I know people would have to say, well, about the film, it's not great. But it was always looking like it was going to win. But, just that late push saw it miss out in the end. I think From Man Still Here just had that late passion push, but it was too late. That came a bit early where he managed to get in for film and actress, but I think if Lives of Others had to push a bit sooner, I think Muir might have got in. I think he may have got in at the BAFTA the following year. I think this might have been a 2007 at the BAFTA. I could be wrong, and I think he did get in at the BAFTA. But I think that'd be my pick.
All right. Well, I will say he is on my honorable mentions list. I'm glad that he's definitely going to be in the conversation, because I tried to get him in my 5. I couldn't quite get him up to the top there. So he's in my honorable mentions. V, I'm glad you threw out Rudy Youngblood in Apocalypto. He's also in my honorable mentions. That movie is just a really great ensemble cast that I've never heard of any of those actors, and so I thought they all brought a lot of dynamic roles to that film. I'll talk a little bit about Apocalypto more shortly. I've got Hugh Jackman for The Prestige in my honorable mentions. I think The Prestige is one of the better Hugh Jackman performances. He really does a lot in that movie and maximizes what he is as an actor. And then my other nominee on honorable mentions is Cillian Murphy for The Wind That Shakes the Barley. Wanted to get him into the 5, just couldn't quite get him in there. Here are the 5 guys that I've got. The first one might be a little bit eye-roll inducing. I do apologize. Sacha Baron Cohen for Borat. And I know that the character and that movie has sort of become like this cultural point where it became so mimicked in pop culture. Everyone did a Borat impression, and it took on a life of its own. But I think what Sacha Baron Cohen did with that role was really crazy. Like, there were people who did not understand that was an actor. Sacha Baron Cohen, first nominee for Borat. Second nominee is going to be Clive Owen for Children of Men. I think that he's sort of an everyman character, and there's like kind of a nothingness to his character, which I actually think he pulls off really well. He's not trying to be flashy or showy with it. He's just trying to be the everyman person. I've got Matt Damon for The Departed. I think that this is a really good spot where Matt Damon started to continually flex his acting chops. And I never really bought into Matt Damon as like somebody who could play a villainous character until The Departed. And then I sort of saw, okay, Matt Damon can really dabble in different areas where I didn't think he could prior to The Departed. My fourth nominee is going to go to Ryan Gosling for Half Nelson. Like you said, Daniel, I think it's maybe a top 2 Ryan Gosling performance out there. He's incredible in it. It's also a really subtle performance and is not trying to be too flashy, but it really highlights what Gosling can do. And then my fifth and final nominee is going to go to Forest Whitaker for The Last King of Scotland. For me, there's no two ways around this one. It was hands down Forest Whitaker for my personal taste. I think he's incredible. I apologize that we're going to leave Daniel on his own little island with Ulrich Mew, and everyone else is going to be on The Last King of Scotland bandwagon. But just the way he can balance charm with menace and flip a switch is so shocking, and so it's really it's a crazy role, but it's also something that's really believable. Like, there are people out there who are so charismatic and yet can also do so many heinous things behind the scenes. And I just think that Forest Whitaker pulled it off in a way that it's one of the great lead actor wins for me. I think it's the role Forest Whitaker was born to play. It's hard for me to see anyone else doing that character or see anything else. When I think of Forest Whitaker, I think about him in Last King of Scotland. So for me, it was a very obvious win. I felt like that was going to be who I picked pre-prep, and it just held up through all the watches I did. As much as I enjoyed all of the other male performances, I'm very much in the Team Forest Whitaker camp. And so when we get to social media, we will just have 2 options. On this one, for the first time, we'll deviate from all the previous categories. So you can side with Daniel, who has Ulrich Mew in The Lives of Others, or you can side with myself, V, and the Academy. Very rare that V and I are siding with the Academy for anything, but we're both going to be siding with the Academy for this one. So we've got Forest Whitaker in The Last King of Scotland. All right, let's jump over to Best Director now. So the nominees in 2006 were Alejandro Iñárritu for Babel, Clint Eastwood for Letters from Iwo Jima, Stephen Frears from The Queen, Paul Greengrass for United 93, and finally winning his Oscar after a career of great work was Martin Scorsese for The Departed. All right, Daniel, you're going to start us off for this one. Who do you have in Best Director?
I think this was a good year. I think they had so much to choose from, and I think they chose really, really poorly. I think out of all the categories, this is where they did the worst, the Academy, I think. Even including the winner, controversially. We'll get to that. I think my honourable mentions, I have Clint Eastwood as an honourable mention. I'm not a fan of Flags of Our Fathers. I think Letters from Iwo Jima is considerably better. But I think to do these sort of 2 companion piece films from the Japanese and the American perspective is, it's ambitious. And I think he'd largely paid it off, especially with Letters from Iwo Jima. I think if Flags of Our Father was better, there'd be better cohesion between the 2. I think it's definitely more interesting left for Ujima. It's rare, or it was rare at the time, to see sort of these films to do with American conflicts from shifting perspective outside of the American perspective, which obviously is the point of the two films. So it was refreshing. I do enjoy it, but I do have him missing out where he got in. I think he was a surprise nominee on the day. I don't know if he got in anywhere. Probably maybe Critics' Choice, possibly, but I don't think he got in many places. I have Jonathan Dayton in Valerie Harris is an honorable mention for Miss Sunshine. I think it's just just the way it's made is just it's charming. The film is just a beautiful film, like surface and substance. I think it's just a sweet film, just from start to finish. And they've not really had the success since then. I've not followed much of the work. I remember they did Ruby Sparks, I think, which I thought was okay, which also had Paul Dano in it. I can't remember what else they've done other than that, but I did really like. I think they were solid, but I think them missing the DGA was the telling sign that things started to shift. I think once they won the PGA, people were thinking they were going to win. But I'm pretty sure they missed the DGA, which is going to cost them. I'm not sure. Then I have Bong Joon-ho, honorable mention. A lot more well known now since Parasite came out. Always loved Bong Joon-ho's work, going back to his first film in 2000 back in obviously did Memoirs and Memories of Murder, which is just exceptional filmmaking. Alongside with Parasite, just two favourite films. The Host is not to that level, but I still think it's a great creature feature. Some great themes to do with V touched on at the very start of the show about conflict and stuff in it. It all starts from like eco-terrorism from like the Americans. It's like toxic dumping sort of leads to it, and then the ongoing like the battle between South Korea and the US, and it sort of plays out in the background while this creature feature happens. But he has a great way of just blending genres seamlessly. He does this is another example of it, where he manages to blend creature feature with like family drama in political drama. I think it's great filmmaking. Shane Meadows is an honourable mention for This Is England. He'd done loads of small independent British films at the time, but this was his big breakout. And then obviously This Is England's gone on to have a TV show, and obviously the Love Helen Walsh Stephen Graham as well. In the last honourable mention is Florian Henkel von Dommersmark. Now, I'm glad he wasn't nominated because I would love to see Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola try and read that name off a sheet when the nominations are read out. I think the three of them would have struggled, but there's a lot of letters there. But the five that I have in, so with the fifth place pick is Martin Scorsese at having fifth. I think it is a legacy win. I loved The Departed. He's one of the, I'll probably have it in the fourth or fifth favourite Scorsese. He should have won way before this multiple times. So I think it's a legacy win. I think it's well made. I don't think it's exceptionally made. I think the real achievement in it, from a filmmaking standpoint, is the editing. I think Film and Shoemaker's editing is what elevates it. I think to be 2.5 hours long, and he just absolutely it just ripped through that 2.5 hours. It absolutely flies through it. It's got high stakes and high intensity, quick editing throughout, and it goes a mile a minute, and it really works. And it's condensing multiple storylines from Infernal Affairs, from obviously what he was adapted from, which was 3 films, and they only really touched on the first film of Infernal Affairs, but that has like 2 love interests in Infernal Affairs with the 2 characters, which they condensed to just Vera Farmiga's character in this one, where they're both sort of seeing her, she's like the police psychiatrist, and she's sort of like, so they have to condense a bit down from the original Hong Kong films, but I think it really works. It is the rare example where an English language remake improves on the original. And I do like Infernal Affairs, but it's not as good as The Departed. But I do think there is better nominees than Scorsese who should have won or should have even been nominated. My 4th place nomination is Alejandro Inarritu. The Three Amigos all had films this year. Don't know if that's happened since or before. Obviously, between the three of them, dominated Best Director in the 10s. I mean, I think at 5 out of 6 years that won it, I think only Damien Chazelle broke them up for La La Land. But, you know, Inarritu back to back for the Revenant. Birdman in 14 and 15. So I think it was only a matter of time he was going to win. But I think, like I touched on earlier, comparisons to Crash, I think it's like that sort of to do with racism in global affairs. But there's a lot more scope to it. In all these stories told over different continents in different languages. There's like 6 different languages, including Japanese sign language, and I think it's very, very cohesive. And it doesn't feel messy. I think it all comes together pretty well. It's not my favourite Inarritu film, but I think to have all them stories blend so well is, is down to his filmmaking. I think it's exceptional to be able to do that. My third place pick is Paul Greengrass for 1993. He won the BAFTA, I think. It is a very heavy film. I remember when it came out, a lot of people I knew in school and stuff like didn't want to see it because they knew it'd be a lot, and it is a lot to watch. How he's put this film together just recently, obviously he said in the lead up to this a few weeks ago, I've recently just come back from a trip to New York and I went to the 9/11 Memorial Museum. I mean, obviously you see all messages and the phone calls that were made, by passengers and people in the Twin Towers and World Trade Center and stuff. And how this film was put together by a lot of these messages and phone calls, real life phone calls and messages that they got from like the archives, and they made this film from that to make it as real as possible. I think is exceptional filmmaking. They got the air traffic controller. He plays himself. The air traffic controller, to have him come back in. I don't know how he doesn't have PTSD to go in and put himself in that situation again, like for a film. It's just, I think it's great filmmaking. He's got a lot of good editing. Obviously he got to the bottom mate the following year, and even though it is this real, obviously tragic event, global event, which I could have been say it's a bold move to try and make that film. I think it was very, very bold. And it was only 5 years later, and I think even if it came out today, 24 years later, you'd still say it's a bold move to make a film about that. And obviously, there's been other films like the World Trade Center and stuff, but I think it is great. I think it's a great piece of filmmaking, and it's very, very powerful. The second place pick, these two were a toss-up. The top two was very, very difficult to separate because they're two of my favourite filmmakers. They both had films out this year. Neither of them were nominated. Neither of their films were nominated for picture, and I think that's a disgrace. I think they were both under-nominated in numerous categories, particularly one of them. Just coming, not getting the win, I have Guillermo del Toro in second. It was very, very difficult. Pan's Labyrinth is probably my third or fourth favourite film of all time. Absolutely love it. Similar to the Del Toro's work. The way he sort of does these sort of adult fairy tales, he brings great realism and darkness to him, but still have that level of enchantment to him, like with the Devil's Backbone or Kronos or Mimic, which are not as strong as his early stuff was not quite as strong. He's not quite as fleshed out as his career progressed. Even Hellboy, the two Hellboys were great. Which just shows when you see the attempts to try to do with Hellboy since he steps away, how shambolic they are. He just speaks to the creatures. I know you both had Doug Jones in, and you had him win, Andrew. Just some of the creatures he's had throughout these films over the years, it's just they're just iconic, and it's just great creature design. And Obviously, we've got Frankenstein coming out this year, which I'm looking forward to. I do have him just missing out to Alfonso Cuarón for Children of Men. It was very, very difficult to separate them. But I think just from a filmmaking standpoint, I think you could argue a good lot of that is down to Lebowski's cinematography. Obviously, he didn't win for this. I think Pan's Labyrinth won cinematography. Well, Lebowski then won 3 years in a row anyway in the 10, so I'm sure he's not. It's just some of the filmmaking in Children of Men. Everyone always thinks of like the car scene with the camera in the car, the long take in the car when there's a camera turning around and there's a car. Then you've got the tracking scene through the sort of encampment by the coast, which goes on for about 15 minutes, where like Charlie Hunnam's trying to track down Theo as they're like wandering through like this coastal town that's become basically like a refugee camp. It's just in like what you talked about when you're talking actress, the birthing scene, which is like a one take scene, also leads on to that. I think it's just sensational filmmaking. And then you see a lot of these one take and long take films now. People say, oh, I can be too gimmicky, like similar to we said adolescents before, sort of having. I think I've not watched it, but I think that the studio on Apple TV sort of had a one take premise like so. But I think with the long takes in Children of Men, I think are some of the best long takes going through these sets, these amazing sets of like a crumbling British society. It's just sensational filmmaking, and how him and Del Toro didn't get it for nomination, especially when you've got like Stephen Frears leading. Like, what's happening there? I don't know how that can happen, you know. Yeah, I'd have definitely at my pick would be Quaron Boy. It's very, very close.
I had a feeling you were going to pick Cuarón. I wasn't 100% certain, but I had a feeling you were going to lean that way. I'll go next, and then we'll have V finish us off, and we'll see where we stand on this. I only have one honorable mention I'm going to throw out there, and this is my heel turn moment, because my honorable mention is Martin Scorsese for The Departed. I don't think that's a top 5 directed film in 2006. Apologies to Marty. He's my all-time favorite film director. But this is the biggest makeup Oscar of all makeup Oscars in the history of the Academy Awards for my money. It's like, if they had given Marty an award for anything else in his career, which he deserved multiple times over, he would not have been winning for The Departed. You cannot convince me that this is a movie that earns him an Academy Award for directing if he has anything else to his name prior. I don't buy it. It's a very well-directed film, but to your point, Daniel, I think a lot of what Thelma does in the editing room is what really makes that movie sizzle and cook and move. And so, apologies to Marty. He's going to be just outside my 5. The 5 people I have nominated for Best Director are Mel Gibson for Apocalypto. I'm not here to condone anything that Mel Gibson does in his personal life, but goddamn it, he directs that movie really well. Like, that movie is tense, and I thoroughly enjoy what happens in that movie. I'm going to nominate all 3 of the Three Amigos, Iñárritu for Babel, Cuarón for Children of Men, Guillermo del Toro for Pan's Labyrinth, and then my 5th nominee is going to go to Chris Nolan for The Prestige. I think that is one of his better directed films. I think it relies on less of the time gimmick than so many of his recent films have done, and I think it's a much more story-driven movie, and I really like what Nolan does with that. Just like you, Daniel, this comes down to 2. It's Cuarón or it's Del Toro. I could flip-flop on either of them, and I'm going to kind of throw a lifeline and hope that V picks who I think she's going to pick, so he's represented at the dance. I'm going to pick Alfonso Cuarón as well for Children of Men. I just think that if I'm like really sizing up Del Toro and Cuarón and what they're doing with their films, I think that there's a lot more that's happening with Pan's Labyrinth in all of the other technical aspects of the costume design, the set design, the acting. There's a lot at play beyond just what's happening behind the camera. As much as I respect Del Toro, I'm literally splitting hairs here, but like what Cuarón does with Children of Men is so propulsive. The one takes shots aren't there as a gimmick, but they're there to immerse you in the language of the film in such a way. I just think it's a masterpiece of directing. It's flawless on every single level. So Alfonso Cuarón for me. everything you said, Daniel, I agree with. I think that he has to get my win. But again, I'm hoping that V, I'm not trying to pressure you into this, V, but I'm hoping V does what I think she's going to do. So Guillermo del Toro has a chance at the online poll, but we'll see. So V, over to you now for your best director.
Okay, so my runner-ups are Martin Scorsese for The Departed. I don't love this movie, and I know he's a very talented filmmaker, and it would obviously be a worse movie if someone less experienced was making it, but it's not really my cup of tea, and I wasn't too impressed. Stephen Frears for The Queen, and Ken, I think it's pronounced Locke, for The Wind That Shakes the Barley. Both great films. I feel like that it wouldn't have been as enjoyable, especially that there's parts where The Queen is a little dry, but his sense of realism really makes it an enjoyable movie. But these other films I just also generally like more. So going to my nominations, I've got Sofia Coppola for Marie Antoinette, just because of the pure style. I don't love all of her movies, including this one, but I love that she has a very clear sense of what she wants to portray on film. And it's not like anything else that you really see. It would be, it would be very easy to sort of mimic it because it's so unique that if someone starts doing a bunch of pastels and modern music and a feminist take on older stories or figures from the past, I like that there's not a lot that exists. And especially, almost 20 years prior, there was less female directors. So I wanted to put her on the list. I've got Bill Condon for Dreamgirls, just because movie musicals can be very bad, and he makes this one very enjoyable. It's cinematic and musical at the same time, where I feel like the failures happen when you try to make it just a stage show with a camera, or you try to just completely remove the musical roots and try to go to cinematic. And he's able to do both very well and bring you into the lives of these women and some of the men in their lives. I've got Mel Gibson for Apocalypto, similar to what you said. He's an odd person who believes some weird things, and I didn't want to like this movie or direction, but I was like, oh, this is very unique, and I'm glad that he tried to make it as accurate to the time as possible with native actors and native language, and is not trying to make it too like Americanized. So I at least appreciate him for that. And then I've got Clint Eastwood for Letters from Iwo Jima, a very powerful movie. I have not seen Flags of Our Father, so it hasn't tainted my perception of it. So I'm glad that I watched it in a vacuum. I'm not big into war movies, so I don't have as big of like a repertoire to draw from. But it was one of those where I went in and I thought I was not going to like it, and I thought I was going to be like, just a boring war movie. But no, I really enjoyed it. And then yes, you're right. We've got Del Toro as our winner for Pan. Can't you can't really go wrong with him. Just similar to what I said about Sophia, like he has such a very clear artistic vision, and I actually watched the movie with his commentary over it, and all the details that you would just miss. There's just like a frame goes by and he's just like, oh, and in this there's like this little thing over here that indicates that in the future this is happening. And it's just sort of I like hearing how well thought out everything is, that the color palette is thought out, that the color red means something different from green and blue, and they're used purposefully throughout the film to indicate what state of mind not just the protagonist, but like you as the viewer should be in when you're viewing these things. It's very scary, but also, as you said, it's very whimsical and it pulls you in. It's just not traditional horror where it just wants to terrorize you. It wants to like add an element of fantasy to it as well. So I just don't think there's a lot of people like him, and that's why I want him to have all of the accolades.
I glad you went where I thought you were going to go, because I was a little concerned. I'm like, oh, I hope Del Toro's at this table for this opportunity. So this is going to be one of the more interesting online polls I think we've done to date, because I think all three directors have a swath of people that support them, and I think all three are going to do well. But I'm so excited to see where we end up when we get to the end of this battle. Daniel and I both have Alfonso Cuarón for Children of Men. You can side with us. You can side with V. She has Guillermo del Toro for Pan's Labyrinth. or you can go with the Academy and go with Martin Scorsese for The Departed. Probably a good indicator of where we're all going to go on this next category, but there's always the possibility for somebody to veer where we think they're going to go one way. So let's get to Best Picture now, and we'll see where we all stand on it. The actual nominees in 2006 for Best Picture were Babel, The Departed, Letters from Iwo Jima, Little Miss Sunshine, and The Queen, with The Departed taking top honors. Now, because the Academy nominated 5 films in 2006, we're going to adhere to those rules, and only 5 spots will be given for our nominees, which I think is always a really challenging thing, especially in the few years before they expanded to 10. Like, we're right on the cusp of them expanding to 10, and there's plenty of films that I would love to get inside, but we're only dealing with 5. I'll go first, then we'll go over to the two of you. A couple of honorable mentions really quickly. I haven't mentioned it at all. I think it's only come up once early on. V for Vendetta, I think, is a very, very good film. I'm a huge fan of the graphic novel. I don't think that the film pulls it off as well as the graphic novel does, but I do think there's enough there to make me say, go check out V for Vendetta. It's a very well-made film, and it tells a story about a complex issue and the idea of surveillance and authoritarian state. And I think it's the type of media that people should consume. So check out V for Vendetta. The Wind That Shakes the Barley, I would love to have gotten into the conversation a little bit more, but I just wasn't able to. And then the movie I haven't mentioned at all, but I do think it's a brilliant comedic satire that has somehow turned into literally what our day-to-day life is now, and that's Idiocracy. Every time I go back to Idiocracy, I'm like, how are we living in an era this stupid? And yet, here we are. But those are my honorable mentions. The 5 films I've got in my Best Picture: Children of Men. I do have The Departed in my 5. I've got Little Miss Sunshine. I've got Pan's Labyrinth, and I've got The Prestige. I think Little Miss Sunshine is probably the surprise of those 5, but I do think there's an area where dramedies don't get enough love. And Daniel, you had mentioned kind of that already, where I feel like that movie sort of had this great run through Sundance, and I think it's a really wonderful movie to watch and enjoy, and it tells an interesting story about family that I can certainly relate to on some degree. My family is nowhere near as chaotic and scattered as that family is, but I think that's a really endearing movie. I had to get The Prestige in there as well. I also think, even though I said Marty was outside of my 5 looking in on Best Director, I do think it's hard to deny the rewatchability, and The Departed is just a very easy movie to consume, and I think it is well made, and I have no issue with it being in my 5, but it's so far down from Children of Men and Pan's Labyrinth, which for me are the 2 defining films of 2006. I honestly don't care which one of them wins. I just hope one of them goes on and beats The Departed on the social media vote. But I'm going to give my win to Children of Men, just like I gave my win to Alfonso Cuarón. As much as I love Pan's Labyrinth, I think Children of Men tells such a compelling story about sort of this dystopian world that doesn't feel too far removed from where we could be at very soon if wrong choices aren't made. I do encourage people to check out Children of Men if they haven't seen it. And if you want to listen to me talk for like an hour and a half on Children of Men, I did an entire episode of a podcast with a friend of the show, Mike, over at Cinemusts. So if you want to hear me go like fully deep dive into Children of Men, go check out Cinemusts. I did a full episode on it. I think Children of Men is the best film of 2006, and I think it's only gotten more and more resonant as time has passed over nearly 20 years now. And so for me, clearly the win. As much as I love Guillermo, as much as I love Pan's Labyrinth, Children of Men is my choice. Let's go over to V now and see what V's got for her best.
Okay, so I'll tell you the ones who missed the cut first. Last King of Scotland, Apocalypto, Notes on a Scandal, Little Miss Sunshine, and Departed all were, if this had been a 10 pick, because I started with the 10 and then I cut down, that's what I would have picked. I do like, all of these, but I just did not love them enough to put them in the 5. The same with The Departed. I think part of the problem was because it had a reputation that kind of preceded itself, it kind of overhyped itself a bit, and I just went in expecting too much, and I just kind of felt like, oh, this is a good like cop spy thriller, but it's not as monumental as I think some people make it out to be. But for my actual picks, I've got Wind That Shakes the Barley, Dreamgirls, Devil Wears Prada, Pan's Labyrinth, and my winner is Letters from Iwo Jima. which is a bit surprising. Yes, I know it, partly because it was much more like I get very upset at like World War II related things. I don't watch a lot of movies of that time because I find them very upsetting, even if they're not like directly about like Nazis or concentration camps, just anything about soldiers of that time, I find very upsetting. And I just had a bigger emotional response, especially given that they are supposed to be, our quote unquote enemies at this time, but it really humanizes the soldiers and shows that both sides, for the most part, were like 20-year-old boys who had been drafted from, middle income or low income families. And no one really wanted to be there from either side. And their government really did just abandon them at the last minute. It kind of goes from them digging holes pointlessly for some reason and joking around to like everyone just getting blown up, and how upsetting all of that is. And the fact that actually there was like 22,000 of them and only 216 survived of the Japanese soldiers. So like that's the fact that our protagonist, spoiler alert, does make it through, is good and upsetting at the same time. That like I'm glad he survived, but almost everyone he knows is gone. And the fact that it happens, Pan's Labyrinth is beautiful, and I love the inspiration and all of the details that go into it, and the that it's like a fairy tale that's happening in real life, but that it has not happened and cannot happen, and this did, unfortunately. So that's why. And especially since I went into it I was excited to rewatch Pan's Labyrinth, but I was not excited for this, and it just like completely changed my.
I almost fell into my chair there, V. I did not see you going in that direction. I'm also so happy that you have not been influenced by Flags of Our Fathers, and I would recommend, for your own enjoyment of Letters from Iwo Jima, keep it that way and
Yes.
just let that movie stand on its own. All right, Daniel, big decision for you now. Let's see where you go with Best Picture.
Yes. So instead of running through a whole heap of honorable mentions, because it's a lot of films we've talked about, that'll sort of give you an idea what the 5 will be. You want to say what films they made the cut. I'll just touch on some that haven't got been discussed much. One was V for Vendetta. Which I do like. You touched on it. It's a good. I have the graphic novel. The graphic novel is considerably better, but I think the film is just a really good sort of domestic terrorism sort of revolutionist sort of thriller that sort of, have this little Big Brother surveillance world going on with, with John Hurst's character. And, everyone just thinks of Hugo Weaving, how to be in so on. And I think, even though a lot of it isn't him, because he was recast at the last minute, so he just does a lot of the speaking, but it's not actually him. It was God, I can't remember who it was now. But yeah, V for Vendetta was another one which you also touched on was Idiocracy. Now, Idiocracy is not. It's not a great film, Idiocracy, but it's one of them films which shows how perception of film can change as the years progress. Now, I'm not saying it was close to getting in, so it's fine. But it's one of them films where when it came out, it was largely negatively received by most people because it's just a bit daft and over the top and a bit heavy-handed with what it's trying to say. But I think as the years have progressed, it's one of the films that people look back on and you're like, it's received a lot better now. I think as it's become more, it's become somehow more real, even though it's so outlandish. It's one of them films that is just like, it'll only age better, where some films don't do well with age. It will only age better. I'm thinking even in 20 years' time, like, not many people saw it when it came out, and not many people have seen it since, but it might be one of them films in like 20 years' time where it's even closer to whenever it's set in this ridiculous future where, everyone waters plants with rain, basically. Or whatever you like an energy drink. It's like, I think people will just grow with audiences. Another film I wanted to touch on, because even though 2006, I think we've all mentioned, was a really good year with top tier stuff, where I think the year did lack was in animation. So there is one film I would want to bring up, because the the animated nominees that year were 4. I think it was like Cars, Happy Feet, and Monster House, I think. None of which are great. You've got Cars, which is one of the weaker Pixar films, definitely at the time anyway. Although it's better than Cars 2. Happy Feet isn't great, but it's better than Happy Feet 2. And Monster House, which is probably my favourite out of the 3, but it's still not great. But one I'd like to bring up is Paprika, which is, I only watched it first time about 3 or 4 years ago, and I just love the animation style of the anime in it and how it uses its artistic visual style to sort of merge real life with dreams, and that's where it inspired like Inception came from, like Paprika, and similarly I have like Perfect Blue led to like Black Swan and so on. I think Paprika is one I'd like to shout out with like as an animated film from the year. But as for the 5 that I've gone with, in no particular order to start with before saying the winner, the 5 are The Departed, Children of Men, Pan's Labyrinth, Little Miss Sunshine, and This Is England for the 5 I have in. And I think all 5 are deserving. I nearly put in The Lives of Others very, very close. It was probably the closest to sneaking in. I think, like talks about Ulrich Muir's performance and the fact that he only died a few months after the Oscars that year, and he was actually spied upon by his wife in real life in the 80s, like, as well. He was a Stasi surveillance person who didn't know he's crazy. So, but out of the 5, it is a toss-up, similar to Director, with the same 2 films. But I'm going to do a classic Academy movie, and I'm going to split voting, and I'm going to give Best Picture to Pan's Labyrinth. It is one of my favourite films of all time. It's just a beautiful film. It's one of the films that just has everything. It's got conflict. It's got, the historical background of the Spanish Civil War. It's got a really great villain. It's got great production design and costume design and creature design and visual effects. It's got great performances. The music in it's beautiful. The lullaby that the bumming stuff, I just always remember. Just a film I could watch again and again and again. I don't think I'd ever get tired of. I think, it's got a good level of ambiguity to it. There's times where I watch it, depending what mood I'm in, where I like to think it's real. For Ophelia's sake, that this whole fantasy thing is a real thing that's happening. And then there's times when I'm a bit more of a cynical mood for whatever reason, where I start to side with that it's all in her head, that she's done it to escape from this very, very horrible situation she's in with this horrible fascist stepdad, in the fact of, a mother dying in childbirth and a dad being dead in the war. It's just the instincts that are away in the war. It's just like, it's a very bleak story in the fantasy element. I think whichever way you see it, if it's real or if it's in a head to make a coping mechanism, I think it works either way. And I think that fantasy element from Del Toro is what allows it to work either way. I could have flipped this with Children of Men soon with directing. You could ask me another day. But they're the 2 in both categories for me. Like someone see Self Andrew that above the rest by a considerable margin, I would say. But yeah, I'll go with Pan's Labyrinth for the win on this one.
You definitely just saved our ass when it comes to feedback from people on social media, because if Pan's Labyrinth wasn't in the conversation, I feel like I would be taking some heat from some people. So thank you for pulling that one off. All right, so when we get to Best Picture, you're going to have 4 options. This will be a lot of fun. You can side with myself. I have Children of Men. You can go with V, who has Letters from Iwo Jima. Daniel has Pan's Labyrinth, and the Academy has The Departed. Cannot wait to see what comes from that. Now, before we wrap things up, I do want to remind everyone I'll be taking time to answer all the 2006 listener questions submitted in a special mailbag episode that will release exactly 1 week after this goes up. I want to thank everyone again that took time to submit those questions. They are always appreciated. That's going to do it for this recording, but this is only the beginning. Now that our picks have been made, it's going to be up to you, the fans, to decide what goes into the Almanac as the true winners. We're going to be putting up social media polls across 5 platforms in the coming days, and I need your votes to be cast. Again, the more places you follow the show, the more opportunities you have to vote for the things that you love. Before we sign off, though, I want to see what's coming up from the two of you. This episode will go up on Friday, May 9th. So, Daniel, anyone who's listening to this show, what should they be on the lookout for you over at DanLovesFilm on the socials? Do you have anything on the way that people should anticipate?
Well, like I said earlier on, I'm hoping to get my own podcast up and running. I'll plan out how I'm going to how the setup of it and, how the format of it and so on. So that'll probably take me some time to do that, hopefully by this summer. I'll try and have something set up and try to start eyeing up guests to this time. Because on DanLovesFilm, I mostly talk about new releases. It's usually a review. I don't do a lot of reviews, it's more reviewing new releases. So it'd be looking to have guests on to discuss whatever's just come out or a recent release. I do rankings and stuff where if a film just come out, I might rank all the films by that certain filmmaker, something like that. But in the meantime, I'll just be writing the film reviews and try and get a couple out a week as much as I can. Obviously, try and fix writing them and seeing the films in around work because it takes me. So sometimes it'd be more delayed than others when I can get them out. We'll do the best they can. But I think as for reviews, the next review I'll probably post will be for Black Bag, which I watched last week, which I thought was very good. I was very surprised how intimate it is. You've got all these big names in it. Kate Blanchett again. She's called again. She's called Kate Blanchett in that one as well. And, it's got all these big names in it, but it's surprisingly intimate. Really good espionage, low-key espionage film from Steven Soderbergh. And then off that, I'll be probably watching Sinners next weekend when that comes out, which I'm looking forward to, and Warfare, which comes out here on Friday as well. So, which I'm looking forward to both of them based off early reviews, and I like both Ryan Coogler's and Alex Garland's work. So I'm looking forward to both of those. So I'll probably drop the following reviews.
And I imagine most people who listen to this show are familiar with your work over on DanLovesFilm. You have a really, really nice following over there, a good community of people. So I've been a huge fan watching all of the reviews that you put up. Can't wait to see what you eventually do with the podcast down the road. Looking forward to that. And V, now I know you have some really exciting news right now. Your most recent novel, The Devil We Used to Know, is available to purchase on Amazon. For those who aren't familiar with it, why don't you give us a little bit of a taste of what people can expect from your new book?
Yeah, so it's a paranormal thriller, and it oscillates in time between now and the early 2000s, which actually makes the year we picked quite pertinent. It's about a man who has been accused of being responsible for his wife's disappearance, but he claims that it is a evil entity that they once fought off in their past as teenagers in the 2000s that has come back to wreak havoc on their lives. So it's a give and take between, is this really happening, or is he making a tall tale and actually responsible for why his wife is missing. So if you like a lot of the nostalgia from the 2000s, especially if you were a teenager or tween during that time, there's a lot of callbacks to the things that we all grew up with, the emo phase and the juicy sweatpants and the rhinestone flip phones. So if you like spooky things and want a bit of that naughty nostalgia, I highly recommend.
I am excited. I don't read nearly as much as I should, but I know my wife, who's an avid reader, is very much looking forward to reading that book as well. So again, I'll have all of the information for all of your socials, both of you. I'll have all your stuff for your book in the description to this. So if you're listening to this right now, if you're watching this right now, go check out the description to get everything on Daniel and V. And look out for the upcoming 6th episode of season 2 in June, where I'm going to be joined by Betsy and Trent Gorham of Never Seen It podcast. We're going to be working out, punching sides of beef, and getting our steps in so we're in top shape to discuss the year 1976. That's right, one of the all-time great years in film history, featuring the likes of All the President's Men, Bound for Glory, Network, Taxi Driver, and so many more, but where Sylvester Stallone and Rocky claimed that year's Best Picture at the Oscars. You can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, Letterboxd, Threads, and TikTok at Rev Almanac. There's going to be timestamps on each category in case you need to go back and listen to a certain part again. And I will, of course, have everything for Daniel and V in the description to this. It's been a pleasure, as always, talking to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm Andrew, and I can't wait to see you next time.